Good morning, everyone. I'm here. People across the country to understanding. TESS was established 20 years ago and has built up a reputation for excellence in the field of training, research and public people across the country to understanding. Never been easy going at TESS. Like a huge factory, we have been working day and night. TESS was established 20 years ago seminars, and has built up a reputation for excellence in the field of training, research and public people across the country to understanding. Never been easy going at TESS. Fall in love like a huge factory, we have been working day and night. TESS was established 20 years ago seminars, and has built up a reputation for excellence in the field of training, research and public people across the country to understanding. Never been easy going at TESS. Fall in love like a huge factory, we have been working day and night. TESS was TESS was established 20 years ago and has built up a reputation for excellence in the field of training, research and publication. But it has never been easy going at TESS. Like a huge factory, we have been working day and night, chuffing out books, activities, seminars, webinars, games, exhibitions, and even lifestyle products, helping hundreds of people across the country to understand English literature, fall in love with it, and pass exams in it. Since the COVID-19 pandemic has started, and there has been a lockdown in different parts of the country, we have been working even harder. Almost 40 research assistants at TESS are working on various projects. New books are being prepared and editing of texts is going on. People are being trained in online education. Technical development of online courses and applications is happening. So much of material has been made since the lockdown has started. Now our aim is to provide these resources to people at very low cost, because we understand our social responsibility to help our countrymen in these hard times. Right now, there is a series of webinars on contemporary theories that started on the 4th of July. Immediately after that, there will be another webinar on traditional theories starting from the 3rd of August to help students acquire theoretical perspectives in a very innovative manner. All the basic concepts will be thoroughly discussed using examples and everyday connections. There is another wonderful product we have developed for lockdown net readiness. Daily rapid-fire quizzes, 4 complete mock tests for net in every month. That means 4 times a month. Plus, every week there is a webinar on very important topics. You can take a monthly subscription. All these are coming to you at very low prices and at the very highest quality. From Tess, your partner in literature studies. One book, Shakespeare Restored. The Shakespeare that Pope has destroyed has been restored by experience, witnessed a disillusionment with the excitement regarding the French Revolution.
And I kind of dreaded this. Most of the other people did too, but the everyday quizzes and weekly tests that ma'am gives, those are helpful too.
If you're looking for a detailed and extensive course on literature, Net English Complete Course on Udemy by Dr. Kalyani Vallath is a course for you. I would recommend this course not just to the Net aspirants but also to the Kerala PSC aspirants as well as the PG students. Many of my PG students have told me that this course has helped them understand the text better as well as prepare better for the exams.
This is Devjani and I'm here to tell you about the benefits of Udemy course that I'm going through of Kalyani Vallath ma'am, my English course, and she's the best teacher available these days because I don't find anybody who delivers just one lecture and the whole thing is in your mind. I mean, being a lady, we don't have that much time to invest for our studies, but still if I listen to her lecture once, I remember everything. It's like she knows how to make mind maps, what information our brain needs at what time, so that we can just recollect it anytime.
Share with you a review of a wonderful online course going right now on Udemy. The course is called the Net Exams course for UGC Net Exam English subject. This course is specially designed by Ms. Kalyani Vallath, a wonderful teacher and an entrepreneur from Trivandrum, Kerala. She has been in this field since long and changing so many students' lives by making them achieve their dreams. She has been designing these wonderful books, audio lectures, video lectures on YouTube, and now through this course on Udemy. This course has some very interesting modules starting from the Old English period to the recent trends going on in English literature. Now we know that English subject as such is a very wide subject when we are talking about this particular exams. So this particular online course covers all the fields, and it is designed keeping in mind the updated syllabus recommended by UGC. All the modules includes videos and PDF transcript, and also some suggestions of books, which books you can read apart from accessing this videos as well. And every module has a online ending test as well, so you can test.
Uses a lot of expressions and she tries to relate it to us a lot. She has a manner which is kind of easygoing, like she's teaching you, but she's also weaving a story along with it. It makes it easier to remember.
And it's a one-time investment. And the second thing, very good thing is that it is very good for like online learning. We cannot reach to Trivandrum all the time. You know, I can't go, being a housewife, being a lady, or a working lady. We cannot do that. So we get all our lectures in our own drawing room, in our own living room. We can sit with our coffee. We can just cherish it anytime. And anytime you are feeling bored, you just pause it and move on for some time and then come back. Which teacher will teach you like this? It's really interesting and very rejuvenating. Moreover, when you are passionate about the subject, it's super cool. Thank you. And the next best feature is the lifetime login that we can do anytime. It will help us in not only UGC NET exams, it will help for assistant professor interviews, and moreover, the price is also very affordable because we tend to purchase some saris etc. also of that amount, so it hardly matters.
That is what she does, right? She creates a picture, a mental image that you can store, and it'll definitely come useful later.
Hope you're enjoying the film show, everyone. I'm here waiting for everybody to log in. All full of energy today for new historicism and cultural studies.
हम्म? हम्म. तुषार कोण? हम्म.
Good morning once again, everyone. Shashikant, we can hear you talking to somebody. Are you
Yes.
beginning the program today?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning to all. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
If possible, shows our video.
Which one?
Yeah, last time we did for that, I forget, Mahendra Patle, Kiran Patil, those people.
Oh, from YouTube.
Yeah, is it possible?
I'll share in the WhatsApp group. I don't have it right now.
Okay, it's okay.
Yeah.
No problem. No problem. How many participants are there?
49 only.
Oh,
I see
Ma'am,
the chat
how are
box.
you now?
Everyone.
Hello,
hello,
ma'am.
sir.
This is
Ah,
Kailash
yes,
Atkar.
yes. Please speak.
Yes, very good morning, ma'am. Good morning, Shashikant sir. Ma'am,
Good
how are
morning.
you now? Are you okay, ma'am, now?
Yeah, I am.
We are very happy and we are very equally curious to listen you, ma'am, now.
Very good. I am prepared.
Almost all the critical concept and terms are getting very clear now.
Thank you.
So, what's your good name, sir?
My name is Kailash Ankushra Atkar. Kailash Atkar from Aurangabad.
Yeah.
I am working in
Dr. Asha, can you please mute your mic?
Sure. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Hello, madam. Good morning. I'm sorry, I was talking to my
Good morning,
driver.
Dr. Asha.
Good morning, madam. How are you?
Fine.
It was nice to listen to you, madam. It is adding to my knowledge so much.
Thank you very much. I'm
Writing one
humbled.
more book, and I'm using your new resource. Some of the terms I just actually use, but now I can use it thoroughly. And really, I'm so grateful to you, madam.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to know this.
Really, madam. You are God sent for us. Really, madam. We are lucky.
Culture studies terms from Kalyani Bhalat.
Yeah. Yes, madam.
Today's term is culture industry. The term culture industry was introduced by Theodore Adorno and Max Horkheimer in their essay called The Culture Industry, Enlightenment as Mass Deception. This is a chapter in their book Dialectics of Enlightenment, published in 1944. Based on Karl Marx's theory of commodification, Adorno and Horkheimer held that the ideological views of the dominant class promoted false consciousness among the working class through what they called the culture industries. The term culture industry addressed primarily the capitalist-driven entertainment industries that can range from exhibitions, sports events, books, newspapers, film, TV, pop music, etc. Adorno and Horkheimer considered popular music in Hollywood as rubbish, devoid of intellectual expression. They argued that through television, film, radio, and popular music, The cultural industries disseminated knowledge in such a way as to subject the consumers to dominant ideologies. The term culture industry described both the production of massified cultural products and
नाही ना.
नंबर माहिती आहे? हे बेंच इकडे सरकव ग.
Hello. Good morning, Shashikant Suresh sir.
Good morning, Raymond. Good morning. Very good.
Good morning, madam.
good morning.
इथे करा सर.
Ma'am, how is your health now?
I'm perfectly fine, thank you.
Wow, very good.
Today's subject is very passionate for ma'am. Cultural industry and cultural studies. That is why.
Wow, very nice.
And definitely she connected new historicism, cultural studies.
One more video.
I've known Kalyani for more than 2.5 decades now. The moment I remember her, there's a poem that I cannot but help remember also along with her. It's a poem by Frost, Robert Frost. And in the poem, it's two roads diverge in a yellow wood. And I took the one less traveled by. I think that's exactly how to describe Kalyani.
It was some 20 years ago that I started my institute. I had just passed from the university and I was just a fresh postgraduate. Then I wanted to have my own career, of course. And I tried working in some colleges, but I was more bent on being a free teacher. I wanted to do something on my own. I wanted to chart out my own career by myself. This does not help you unless you practice.
The methodology that Kalyani has developed in teaching English literature by relating the contents of literature to their own times, to the drama of the writing, the creative process. This method has been extremely successful.
Elizabeth, where are you going? Hey, Laura. So, I heard you've been traveling.
Yes, I've been traveling with my uncle and aunt, Mr. Rana and Mrs. Darla.
And I also heard that your sister ran away.
Yes, it has been a terrible disgrace to the family, but luckily they got married, so it's okay now.
Talk about running away. Did you hear? My sweetheart Sophia has run away.
Oh, is it?
The methods adopted by Dr. Kalyani are certainly very novel and innovative. She uses technology that is accessible to all, like mobile technology as well as YouTube for teaching and learning. And it is found that Dr. Kalyani's classes in the YouTube are followed by thousands of people in different parts of the country.
Instead of teaching her students as recipients of knowledge, she has always been attempting to motivate them, to provoke them, to draw out the best in them by involving them in group activity, in meaningful discussions, etc., etc.
Today's student needs to learn not as facts. Knowledge is not just facts. Knowledge is something that has to be internalized. And I think it's this holistic perspective to understanding literature, to understanding language that has shaped her edupreneurship and the way she has been able to educate thousands of students across India.
I wanted to be a teacher all my life, and I wanted to do some business as well. So this was a good combination.
Awesome.
Yeah, that brings us to the end of the film show. Shashikant, would you like to say something, or shall I just begin? There are 133 participants only online. I wish people came a little earlier. Everybody, please mute your mics. So we have today the topic of history. New historicism as a movement, as a theoretical approach, was not a very long-lived or very impactful movement, I would say. But new historicism is combined with general historicism, post-colonial historicism or subaltern historicism, and also with cultural materialism and eventually cultural studies. So that is why its relevance. New historicism also imbibes a lot of very important principles from Michel Foucault and Raymond Williams, Louis Althusser, and so on. So it is a natural culmination of our discussions in the previous days. It is good we had a day to let it all sink in. I was talking about literary theory for the past 2 weeks, I suppose, in many webinars. And you really need to reflect on it and think about it and cross connect and apply. And that is when you realize the importance of coming to culture. Almost all the theories that we talked about in the previous days have been discussing the concept of power, has been discussing the concept of moving beyond, or the necessity to move beyond binary opposites in various ways. Starting from structuralism and post-structuralism, we have been talking about binary opposites, even in gender studies and feminism also. And we have also been talking about the need to rewrite the structures of culture, to question the institutions of society and culture. And it was with this purpose that New Historicism also came into being. New Historicism was, as everybody might be aware, a new approach to history. And it involved the interdisciplinary connections between literature and history, the literary text and the non-literary text, so to say. So New Historicism developed in the 1990s, and it was 1980s, and it was Stephen Greenblatt who inaugurated this movement with the book Renaissance Self-Fashioning. Organizers, can you please share the YouTube link in the chat box here? So I'm coming to my presentation. New Historicism and Cultural Materialism. I have put the picture of Liberty Leading the People by Eugene Delacroix, the French artist, famous French artist, on the cover. New Historicism emerged as a critical movement in the 1980s, mainly through the work of Stephen Greenblatt. It was in 1980 that his Renaissance Self-Fashioning was written and published. And his approach was heavily influenced by the Foucauldian analysis of power. We already mentioned Foucault in some previous days, in some previous presentations. But today I will be talking in more depth about Foucault, about all his concepts. And Foucault laid the foundations, Foucault's approach to history, because all Foucault's works dealt with history, or a historical revisionism, as you may say. This laid the foundations of the new approach to New Historicism. New Historicism imbibed ideas from postmodernism and post-structuralism, but in some ways it was also against deconstruction. It was a reaction against earlier approaches like new criticism and structuralism, as well as deconstruction, because these three earlier approaches, new criticism, structuralism, and deconstruction, they privileged the literary text over the non-literary text, which the new historicists did not appreciate, because they understood the literary text as a core text of the non-literary text. They understood that the literary text and the non-literary text should have equal importance, or equal positioning in reading. So the new historicists did not place secondary emphasis on history or context. On the other hand, they brought the context forward as a core text. So they did a parallel reading of the historical text and the non-historical or literary text. And as you may expect, because of Foucault's influence, New Historicism understood literature as an expression of the power structures of the surrounding society, what Marxists would call superstructure, the relationship between base and superstructure. There is a Marxist angle or a leftist angle to New Historicism. As you already know, all the theories that we discussed were the cultural left. And so literature and history are both seen as expressions of power from the surrounding society. New Historicism, therefore, as I already told you, does not believe that literature is the expression of an isolated genius, that literature is the self-expression of an author. New Historicism does not believe that. There it is post-structuralist, like death of the author. When New Historicists look at history, they ask this question: who wrote this history? Who is the author? And why is it written? And they examine history as a textual discourse, and they examine literature as a historical discourse. So very famously, it was Louis Montrose who said the textuality of history and the historicity of texts. They understood that every literary text has a historical significance, and every historical text or history is not a monolithic, unchanging set of facts that really happened, but history is a text written by somebody, projecting some ideological positions. So I have a quotation from Louis Montrose here. Sorry. I have a quotation from Louis Montrose here, which I would like to read. By the historicity of texts, by saying that texts are historical, I mean to suggest the cultural specificity. What he means is all texts are historical, all literary texts, even a poem or an autobiography or a fictional work, they are all historical because they are culturally specific, socially embedded. All kinds of writing, not only a novel or fiction or poetry, but all kinds of writing, even your social media posts or some message that you might send to somebody, they're all culturally specific, or a webinar or a lecture that I might give, they're all culturally specific and socially embedded. That is what Louis Montrose says, by the textuality of history. So at first he talked about historicity of texts, why texts are historical. Now he's saying textuality of history. I mean to suggest firstly that by the textuality of history, I mean to suggest firstly that we can have no access to a full and authentic past. He's saying that every historical text should be considered like fiction. History is a text. By that he means that no event or no period in the past we can ever, or in the present even, we can never fully know. We have no access to a full and authentic past. History cannot be looked at as an objective reality because we can't have access to that reality. That reality has disappeared, like postmodernism says. We have no access to a lived material existence. Like we said in the case of meta-narratives, every meta-narrative will hide and silence many other perspectives. A meta-narrative is always one-sided and prejudiced and subjective. So we have no access to a full objective reality, to a lived material existence. And also textual traces are themselves subject to the textual mediations when they become the documents upon which historians ground their text called histories. I will explain. Even if you take something as real that really happened, when historians turn them into documents based on which they write their histories, these documents, because of the very nature of language, because of the very nature of discourse, they become provisional and subjective and mediated. There is nothing called a full, complete, perfect discourse. Everything is fragmented and mediated and constructed and textual because of the very nature of language, because of the very nature of experience, because of the very nature of discourses. So literature, according to New Historicism, does not occupy an aesthetic realm. Like Louis Montrose was saying, literature is all literature is socially embedded. You can't just understand literature from an art for art's sake perspective. You can't just divorce literature from its context like our new critics did. Literature does not occupy an aesthetic realm independent of economic, social and political conditions. Literature is always embedded in economic, social, and political conditions, and literature does not have timeless value. The liberal humanists. The liberal humanists believed that literature is of timeless significance. Literature has timeless value, and literature will forever remain relevant because it contains values of humanity. These values are objective and unchanging. So, New Historicism says that literature cannot be understood as an aesthetic entity like that, because literature is always embedded in socio-political conditions. Secondly, New Historicism understands that history cannot be understood as the world of the past. Rather, history should be understood as the word of the past. You can't understand it as a reality that happened in the past. You should understand it as a text written about the past, as a word, not history as a world. So history is not a homogeneous, stable story about the past. You can't identify a homogeneous pattern of events in the past. Take the independence movement in India. The Congress or the mainstream perspective is that of Mahatma Gandhi leading the entire nation towards independence against the British. But you know that there were many people who disagreed with Gandhi's ideas, who questioned Gandhi's ideas, who led their own individual rebellions within India. So a meta-narrative of Gandhi leading the country is nevertheless needed, and it is partly or largely true probably, but it always contains traces of the other, the absent other. When you see contemporary history, our present political parties creating history and rewriting history, we know that history is not a homogeneous, stable pattern of events. There is so much fighting over history happening these days. Reinterpretations of history, what we understood as history, is being increasingly questioned for political ends, for a lot of positive as well as negative things. So New Historicism understands that history is not a stable background. It is not an inert background of actual events to the literature of the era, which literature simply reflects, but rather history should be understood as heterogeneous and conflictual and dialectical, characterized by disunity. Remember, we said all these ideas in postmodernism also, post-structuralism also. So history is it is not a real given monolithic entity. It is rather becoming. It is in a state of becoming. It is very subjective. It is plural. It is multidimensional. And the author who writes history or literature and the subject of history or literature are both constructs positioned by the era. They are both socially embedded. If you write an autobiography, that autobiography is history, but both the subject of that autobiography, that is yourself, as well as the text of the autobiography are all socially constructed. Now, what are the steps in a New Historicist reading? You understood the philosophy of New Historicism a little bit now. We have not understood, we have discussed you already know it, I know. We have discussed the philosophy of New Historicism, but in your mind, there will be the question, but how exactly do you do this? How exactly do you read a work from a New Historicist perspective? The New Historicist always takes a literary text and reads it alongside a non-literary text. I told you at the beginning, there is a parallel reading. The literary text and non-literary text are read parallel to each other. And how does the New Historicist choose the non-literary text is important. The New Historicist studies or looks at what are the other non-literary texts or historical or legal or economic, etc. texts that were important in that era, that the public had access to in that era. And they will take from history non-literary text and put it side by side along with the literary text. And this non-literary text becomes the frame in which they read the literary text. And the literary text gets embedded in the frame or the non-literary text. That is, they are consciously avoiding creating the relegating the non-literary text into the context. Did you understand? They are consciously avoiding pushing the non-literary text into the context. So at first, in old historicism, we have the text and the context. The text is in the foreground, the context is in the background. And there is a relationship between the text and the context that emerges in old historicism. But in new historicism, the context becomes the core text. The text and context are put side by side and the N is deleted. It becomes co-text. And the new historicist essay embeds the text within the core text, like a frame this becomes. And the new historicist essay begins with a powerful anecdote from here, from the history or from the non-literary core text. It will create an anecdote and powerfully, dramatically start a discussion of the text in relation with the core text. That is how they do it. They are both seen, the text, the literary text and the non-literary core text are seen as expressions of the same historical era, the same power structures. For example, if you did not understand, take a text by Shakespeare like The Tempest, read it in the context of some colonial document or some legal or political document from the Elizabethan era, and read The Tempest in the conjunction with that text. For example, there will be a decree made by the government, by Elizabeth and the court, about how to subjugate slaves in the colonies and how to disempower them, or how to rule over them, etc. If such a non-literary text is there, a historical text is there, reading The Tempest in the context of that non-literary text will give a whole new lot of meanings to Tempest. Tempest will acquire a whole lot of new meanings. Why I took the example of Shakespeare and the Elizabethan era is because all the new historicists basically talked about Shakespeare and the Elizabethan era. Stephen Greenblatt, as you know, this is Henry VIII. Stephen Greenblatt, as you know, wrote Renaissance Self-Fashioning from Moore to Shakespeare. That is a book published in 1980. And he draws attention upon the concept of self-fashioning. By juxtaposing Renaissance plays with colonial documents, he talks about how the Renaissance British people self-fashioned themselves. The reading, the new historicist reading done in Stephen Greenblatt's book draws attention to the marginalization and oppression of the colonial other, of the colonized people, that formed a background to the great Elizabethan literature. Elizabethan literature is great. We consider it as the golden age of English literature. But that golden age literature is based on actually horrifying colonial policies that marginalize and dehumanize the colonial others. That is what Stephen Greenblatt showed. And he introduced a concept of self-fashioning. Self-fashioning is, it is actually part of cultural studies. It is the creation of oneself, one's appearance, one's culture, one's attitudes, how you create all this according to a set of socially accepted standards. How we dress, how we live, how we get education, what kind of entertainment activities we have, etc., are all based on socially accepted standards, isn't it? If suppose there is a young man who has got a job and made some money, and he wants to get a vehicle. Will he get a horse and go on hunting on that horse, or will he get a super bike and go on a ride across the country on the super bike these days? It is the second thing will happen, because it is culturally accepted and it is part of your self-image or self-fashioning. We build houses of a certain kind. We buy cars and other vehicles. We buy clothes. We have certain lifestyles. We go to certain restaurants, etc., as part of our endeavor to self-fashion ourselves. In the Renaissance period, Stephen Greenblatt shows that this is the monarch, and if the monarch is dressed in this manner, all the courtiers will try to put on similar fashions. They will even bring their face to look more like the monarch. If the monarch has a beard like this, every nobleman will try to put on such a beard. And they will do it in a very casual manner, as if they are not imitating. Stephen Greenblatt says that in the Renaissance period, there was what is called sprezzatura. Sprezzatura means sprezzatura, S-P-R-E-Z-Z-A-T-U-R-A, means imitating the master and trying to be like him, but in a very careless, nonchalant manner, as if you're not imitating. Let us take the example of movies. In 1970s, 80s movies, Hindi film actresses like Sadhana or Asha Parekh, etc., were very famous. And their hairstyle, the way they wore their flower here on the nape of their neck, the way they drew their eyebrows, the way they let loose a strand of hair as if they didn't really take care about hairstyle. The whole hair will be put up like this, but there will be a strand of careless hair lying. All these influenced the women, the middle class metropolitan women in India. When I grew up as a child, I remember seeing my mother and aunties often emulating or imitating these styles, but not in the manner of mimicry or parody, but in the manner of pastiche, or imitating without showing that you are imitating. This is what is called in the Renaissance period as sprezzatura. And along with our Stephen Greenblatt, I should also remember Baldassare Castiglione, who wrote the Book of the Courtier. In the Book of the Courtier, he shows how courtiers should dress like the king and behave like the king, how courtiers should, nonchalant, in a very careless manner, or in a very unobtrusive manner, they should try to resemble their master. Not only resemble, but even try to transform themselves into the master. So what is Stephen Greenblatt doing by talking about all this? Stephen Greenblatt, in Renaissance self-fashioning, is talking about the concept of selfhood. How the concept of selfhood during the English Renaissance throws light on the social practices of the era and also the literature of the era. In the Renaissance, for the first time ever, there was an increased self-consciousness. People were more conscious about their appearance and being and social roles and identity. So, because of this consciousness, as we are today also, what clothes we wear, how we dress. I very deliberately put this big bindi today to look different. Every day there should be something different about my look, I thought, like that. And and also yesterday I was not well, and you are all wondering whether I'll be energetic today. So I consciously self-fashioned. I consciously did it actually. I made some, because I was thinking of self-fashioning. I made some excited posts in the group. I dressed well, and I put a bindi, which will give me some bright face. And it shows all this appearance. What does it mean? It shows what I'm feeling. Some people asked me, it looks like you're going to rock today. It looks like you're okay today. Because these things that I did or do are bringing my mind, that they are bringing my culture, they are bringing my attitudes, isn't it? I'm a very optimistic person. I am an optimistic person, and I am a very energetic person, but I also have to consciously show it. That is how we are these days. Our culture is like that these days. So increasingly in the Renaissance period also, there was a self-consciousness about clothing and appearance and identity. What does that mean?
when you become self-conscious and you carefully manipulate your identity, when you carefully do things that will create your identity, which like what I did this morning, what does that mean? It means that the concept of identity in that age, the concept of identity in that age is manipulable. Identity as negotiable, identity as manipulable, identity as fluid, identity not as a fixed thing. Did you understand? So in the Renaissance period as well as today, I think our idea of identity is that it is manipulable, it is negotiable, it can be constructed, isn't it? So, in the Renaissance period, people did a lot of self-fashioning. And Stephen Greenblatt and other philosophers have talked about how this clothing and identity appearance all show the encounter between various aspects of culture. For example, what is alien and what is our own? What is authoritative in our culture as against what is alien in our culture? Did you understand? I am a Hindu and my family is conservative Hindus. Traditionally, but of late we are not. In my generation and in my parents' generation, we are not. We are not consciously practicing Hinduism, or we have liberated from the negative effects of religion, I suppose. But in my childhood, I always remember when I walked about without a bindi, my grandparents and older people in the family used to say, put on a bindi, because otherwise you look like a Christian or a Muslim. You should put on a bindi. That is the moment when I gave up bindi. I didn't wear bindi ever after that. Only occasionally as a special thing I wear. Otherwise, I never wear bindi. Because in my child's mind, immediately the question was raised, what is wrong if I look like a Christian or a Muslim? Why should I look like a Hindu? Is that my only identity? If I do not wear a bindi, will I lose my identity? Like that I thought, and I questioned my grandmother also. So what I'm trying to say is, being Hindu is us. They are not us. They are alien. They are other culture, other religion, other community. That kind of an opposition is there in most of the things that we do. In most of the things that we do, that kind of an opposition is there. Why is the mainstream Hindi belt in India against Kerala for eating beef? Because eating beef is not what they do. Our culture is different because of historical reasons. And it is not like we are savage animals or anything. Like, people eat different things in Kerala. A lot of people eat beef, that is all. But beef becomes like a part of your identity and fashion, and your self-fashioning. And eating beef means you are the other. Not eating beef means you are us. That kind of identity is formed. Did you understand? That means, let me generalize now so that you will understand. Wearing a bindi or eating beef or wearing a certain kind of headdress or dupatta, where you wear your dupatta on your head or like this or around your neck, etc., each of it involves a certain different identity. So the ways in which Stephen Greenblatt shows that the ways in which the Renaissance people self-fashioned actually revealed the encounter between the authority and the alien, and also the manipulability or negotiability of identity. And when you construct your identity like that, I wear a bindi, I wear my Mangal Sutra, which I don't wear. I'm no less a wife because I don't wear my Mangal Sutra. I won't be any more of a wife if I wear my Mangal Sutra either. So I wear a bindi, I wear a Mangal Sutra, I wear sindoor in my this line, mathe pe, in my what is this called, this place, etc. If I do all that, then it looks like I am autonomously, I am a unified Hindu in every way. Okay, I am a Hindu. If I don't do all that, I am so much less a Hindu. That kind of a feeling is there in our mind. What does it mean? What it means that our autonomy, the autonomy of our identity is an illusion. So Stephen Greenblatt shows how the autonomy of illusion is created, and that leads to the formation of the self. We are what we are. I am this because of all these pretensions, or all these put on factors which give me the illusion of autonomy. It gives me an illusion that I am an autonomous Hindu. Autonomously, I am a woman. I am a unified woman, and things like that. So the very the very concept of identity is talked about by Stephen Greenblatt. And Stephen Greenblatt says that self-fashioning is almost always happening in language. Not exclusively in language, but almost always it happens in language. And he looks at the literary works and writings of Thomas More, Spencer, Shakespeare, etc., of the Renaissance period, to show how they establish identities in various ways through their writing. In Thomas More, the concept, he's the author of Utopia. Thomas More's concept of identity lay in the crafting of a public role, the desire to escape from, the local and the professional and public role. That is what you see in Utopia. There are some people whose identity is based on their career and public role. For me also, it is like that. I am very uneasy if I don't have a professional role or a career, and I define myself in terms of my career and work rather than anything else. Whereas in Marlowe, identity was associated with the disruption of order. Every time there is a disruption of order, whether it is political or theological or sexual or social, Marlowe, the man, as well as Marlowe, the writer, established his identity. In Spencer, says Stephen Greenblatt, identity is related to loving submission to authority. In Spencer's Fairy Queen, for example, you see how the identity of the protagonist is associated with, or the identity of the writer itself is associated with, his subservience and service of the monarch. So like this, all writers have a different way in which they brought their identities into being. This is what Stephen Greenblatt shows in Renaissance self-fashioning. Now there is, I already mentioned this idea, but let me, in the context of talking about Stephen Greenblatt, let me tell you what is the difference between New Historicism and Old Historicism. The New Historicism was a book by Aram Wieser, who laid out the principles of the discourse or the discipline. Old Historicism believes that there is the reality really out there, and the text will have a meaning like a jewel. And New Historicism, does away with it. It does not believe in the hierarchy between the text and the context. In New Historicism, the text is superior, context is behind. It is not like that. Text and the context are both important. They are parallelly read. The aim is to not present the reality as it really happened, but the reality as it was constructed. How is reality constructed? That is what New Historicism looks at. New Historicism is deeply associated with the theories of Foucault. Now we have to, these are examples of self-fashioning that I've given. Why do some cyberpunk people dress like this? This is an example of self-fashioning. What are the meanings involved in this? Is a counterculture movement. Then what are the meanings involved in this creation of the self in this manner? Or what are the meanings involved in when Malayali women create their identities in this manner? In the context of women entering Shabrimala, there was the division of Malayali women into the Kula Stris, or the traditional women, and the Feminichis, or the liberated women who wanted to enter Shabrimala and question tradition, etc. A lot of Kula Stris, or the traditional women themselves, stood against the other women. And many of them unfriended me, etc. in Facebook. So when you fashion yourselves in certain ways, you saw in the videos, in the beginning of the day in the videos, I had shaved my head, and I was wearing very I was unconventionally dressed. I looked like I reject or abrogate tradition in some ways. It was not an easy task or an easy thing to do. The whole society pointed their fingers at me, but there were lots of people who appreciated it also. So when I did all these things, when I shaved my hair or dressed in unconventional ways, etc., what I was doing was declaring that this is my identity. I was fashioning myself, and when I declare that this is my identity, I am also declaring these are my beliefs, these are my attitudes, these are my worldviews. Identity does not stand separately from my attitudes and worldviews, my social role, etc. So that is how new historicism works. Now let us look at how selfhood in new historicism is associated with subversion, loss, doubt. These are all ways in which the self gets fragmented and gets provisional. I told you identity or selfhood is fragmented or provisional in new historicism, and it experiences subversion, loss, doubt because of historical reasons. As a post-colonial subject, we have experienced loss. As a woman or a liberated woman, I have experienced the subversion and doubt and loss, and so on and so forth. All of us have. And weakness and illusion of autonomy. There is no unified self. There is no unified identity. All of us are fragmented beings. All of us in various ways. However much we pretend, we can only have an illusion of autonomy. We can't really have autonomy. Okay, now old historicism and new historicism. New historicism is more dependent on Foucauldian theories. We will come to Foucault now. Foucault's theory is very difficult to understand and teach because there is nothing called Foucault's theory. There is no Foucauldian theory. Foucault himself did not explain many of the things that he said. He did not fall into any movement or any category easily. Foucault deliberately stood outside the canon of literary theory and philosophy, and he refused to fix his concepts or define his concepts in easy ways. Now, Foucault stood against traditional history. He has, in many ways, stood against traditional history, and he advocated the approach called archaeology to history at first. At first, in the early 1970s, he advocated what is called archaeology. While traditional historicism or traditional history pretended that history is a unified entity, what the traditional historians did is they took evidences from history. There will be, if you want to write the history of the 16th century, the old historians took evidences like books or actual people's living conditions, things that they used, monuments or artifacts from the past. These are all actual historical evidences. They took these evidences, they studied them. Inevitably, there were gaps and fissures. Everything did not fit in together like a jigsaw puzzle. There were many gaps, there were many areas that the old historians didn't understand when they studied these documents. And then they what they did is they threw over these documents the blanket of history. Over these documents, they put the blanket of history, and it looked like there are no gaps and fissures. It looked very unified. Did you understand? This story of history they made and put over the documents so that it looked like there is no discontinuity in history. There are no gaps and fissures in history, that history is one continuous story. Foucault is against this idea. Foucault believes in history as archive. For easy understanding, I can say this. Foucault believed that history is like the book stacks in a library. In a library, there will be many missing books. There will be many spaces in between. It won't be a continuous array of books that you see. isn't it? Like that, history is also full of gaps and discontinuity. Foucault's archival approach gave importance to the gaps and discontinuities. You should rediscover the struggles of the past, and you should accentuate the gaps and fissures. You should not fill the gaps and put over them a blanket of history. In that sense, New Historicism is questioning old history, and New Historicism is anti-establishment, we can say. It goes against, the overarching meta-narratives of history. It goes against the ways in which power works on history and makes a grand narrative out of it. As you know, many of Foucault's ideas, like the panoptic surveillance state, or discourse, or episteme, or knowledge, power knowledge, etc., are all very important in understanding the Foucauldian approach to history. They are all ways in which Foucault questioned the old kinds of history, and also the old perceptions of criminality, psychiatry, sexuality, etc. he questioned. Now, a very important concept in Foucault is that of discourse, and how power knowledge becomes a discourse. Foucault talked about how power works in the society. He questioned the age-old idea that power works from one top people towards the bottom people. The powerful people on the top, one-sided power, it moves towards the or against the people at the bottom, or the powerful people. Foucault questioned it. Instead, he said that in a society, power works in capillary modes or capillary formations. That means power is everywhere. Like the capillaries on our body, power is everywhere. Look at a family. It is not only the father exerting power on the mother and the children, but in some ways the mother can exert power, in other ways children can exert power. So power is ubiquitous, and it is something that reaches the very grain of individuals. You can't say I am powerless, I am a victim. Many of us are living in self-pity, thinking that we are all powerless, that we are victims, everybody is ruling over us. It is not like that. Everybody has some power. We just have to realize it. And power reaches into the very grain of our individual minds and inserts it into all our actions. It is like ideology in Althusser. Ideology is all pervasive, and ideology defines us like that. Power defines us. It is there in our learning processes. It is there in our politics. It is there in our education. It is there in our daily lives. That is why cultural studies is studying popular culture and daily life, because there is a lot of power at work there, and how both oppressive power as well as subversive power. And how did Foucault study all these things? Look at how power works. I got it from the internet. Power knowledge, subjects, power constitutes subjects, establishes institutions, and these institutions control subjects. Power produces forms of knowledge, and knowledge modifies, redistributes, and stabilizes categories of power. Easy to understand. It is everywhere. Did you understand? History as archive means history is like book stacks in a library. They are discontinuous. Foucault talked about such a kind of history as archive or discontinuous, where power works hand in hand with knowledge. In his discussions of sexuality, in history of sexuality, in his discussions of criminality and punishment, in discipline and punish, and so on. And also in his order of things. He understood power not as a dividing power or a dividing practice, as dividing the powerful people from the powerless people. But he moved towards a more positive conception of power, which is productive. He understood power as positive and productive. It is there in all of us, and it is producing our identities, and it is producing us. And power as a hybrid form, spiraling, and containing within it aspects of pleasure, aspects of knowledge, aspects of action and subversion, and so on and so forth. Now, let me explain the concept of archaeology. The term archaeology appeared in many of the early books of Foucault, such as The Birth of the Clinic. What is the subtitle? An archaeology of medical perception. The Birth of the Clinic, an archaeology of medical perception, came in 1973. After that, he wrote The Order of Things, an archaeology of the human sciences. 1970, it was earlier. First book was Order of Things. Then Archaeology of Knowledge. So archaeology was a very pet idea that he used in many of his early titles. And archaeology was his term to denote the research and analysis of history by digging into the past, uncovering the discursive elements of the past, all the conflictual, fragmented elements of the past. These become the documents for the historian to work on, to look at these documents or evidences of the past, which are discontinuous, fragmented, to rearrange them, to work with them, not in any hierarchical manner, but in a structural manner, and to focus on the documents itself, to focus on the documents itself rather than create an overarching story out of it. The old historians will create an overarching story out of the documents. The old historians will cover up the gaps and fissures, but the Foucauldian historian organizes the document. Document means the evidences of history, divides it up, reorganizes it, and defines unities and relations in it, and this becomes history. History that is discontinuous, evolving, becoming. There is no overarching story. And history that is synchronous. It develops synchronously. Thus, Foucault advocated a new approach to the evidences of history, a new approach to the document Foucault advocated. And in Foucault's idea, history is discontinuous, no longer something that the historian has to explain and unify, but discontinuity becomes a positive element in Foucault, where history's objectives are found and validated. A discourse of history, it becomes. Discourse and history are now understood as the same thing. A discourse is a whole way of talking about something, an institutionalized way of thinking. It has its own language. It has its own ways of perspectives, its own perspectives, and the discourse defines you. And the discourse is not unified, it is fragmented. To explain the discourse, there are so many examples we can have, like sexuality, like terrorism, like nationalism, like gender, and so on and so forth. These are all not meta-narratives. They are all elements or entities which become a way of thinking, which procure its own language, and they get institutionalized also very easily. Discourse means, I will read from Foucault. I have put some quotations here. Systems of thoughts composed of ideas, attitudes, causes of action, beliefs, and practices. Once again, discourse is a system of thought composed of ideas. Think of one discourse, you will understand. Nationalism. When you are within the discourse of nationalism, nationalism defines what you should think about India, what you should think about Hindi, what you should think about Muslims, what you should think about religion, and things like that. So nationalism as a discourse is composed of ideas, attitudes, causes of action. That is why anybody who thinks against that discourse was called anti-national. And even if you are a nationalist, that does not mean you should completely accept what the ruling party says, or completely accept certain communities as great and other communities as bad, etc. Nationalism is not one homogeneous thing. Nationalism is a very fragmented and a very multiple plural thing. So Foucault is saying how discourses become oppressive. Discourses silence us. Discourses wipe out the plurality. A discourse should be continuously questioned. A discourse is so comprehensive that everything outside the discourse becomes meaningless and negative. In the order of things, Foucault made an epistemological study of discourses. That is how we'll understand. That is the example I can give you. In the order of things, I told you, published in 1970, Foucault studied epistemologically about biology or life, about economics or labor, and also linguistics or language. And he looked at how in the Renaissance period, and after that the classical period, and after that in the modern period, these ideas changed considerably. What is an episteme? I have already told you yesterday or the day before. I will again tell you later today. Episteme is the a priori of knowledge. Episteme is the preconceived ideas that we have in our mind that makes us accept some things as knowledge. Did you understand? For example, if suppose a boy, there is a bridegroom, there is a man who wants to get married, and he meets a girl, and they are talking to get to know each other. The boy asks the girl, "What do you do?" And the girl says, "I'm learning to fold clothes." I'm learning to fold clothes. That is not knowledge. The boy is confused. "Oh, are you in the hospitality industry? Do you work in a hotel, or are you doing a hospitality course, MBA in hospitality?" The girl says, "No, I'm just folding clothes." Something is seriously wrong. We think the girl is not normal. Why? Because folding clothes outside the hospitality industry is not considered a great knowledge these days. Did you understand? Whereas other household things like cooking may probably considered an even greater. My passion is cooking and I am learning cooking. Sounds more acceptable than my passion is folding clothes. I am learning to fold clothes or wash clothes. These days, if somebody specializes in washing clothes, you don't need them to do that because that is not knowledge anymore. You just buy a washing machine. So like that, in every period, there are certain knowledges. Remember, I told you the example of Borges's encyclopedia, Chinese encyclopedia, where animals are classified in weird ways. So episteme means study of knowledge or history of knowledge. And Foucault, in order of things, studies knowledges of the Renaissance period, of the classical period that came after the Renaissance, and also the modernist period. And he studied Renaissance and found that in the Renaissance period, knowledge is organized around resemblances. I have a give me a second. Yeah, he studied all these things, and already I said this. Foucault studied sexuality, psychiatry, criminality, and understood that these are all discourses. That means they are constantly formed. They give you a certain worldview. They are fragmented, etc. What makes knowledge knowledge? That is episteme. Episteme is what makes knowledge knowledge. In an episteme, what do you mean by an episteme? In every era, there are some a prioris in our mind. A priori means pre-existing ideas in our mind that make some things accepted as knowledge. Episteme. This is what I was looking for. Foucault studied Renaissance episteme, classical episteme, and modern episteme. And for Foucault, in the Renaissance period, everything works according to resemblance. In the classical period, there is representation and categorization, giving rise to science. In the Renaissance period, literature, for example, was based on similarity or life-like literature. Literature is like life. In the classical period, they began to categorize, they began to be more scientific in their approach. Taxonomy developed, representation developed. It is not resemblance. Deliberately, some classes are represented in this way, some people are represented in this way. Dryden represented English culture in a certain way and French culture in a certain other way in of dramatic poesy, etc. Correct. Did you understand? So in the classical episteme, there is representation, categorization, science. In the modern episteme, the centrality is on man. What is man like, and who is man, and what are the ways in which he engages in society and culture. At first, he studies the discourse of life. In the classical episteme, life took the form of natural history. In the modern episteme, or in the modern period, it became biology. In the case of labor, in the classical episteme, it was considered wealth. In modern episteme, it is considered economics. The other day, one of my staff members, one of my colleagues, they were making a promotional material on something. And they asked me, ma'am, when I write, this will bring us, this will certainly bring you wealth. Is that what we should write? Is it correct? They asked. This will certainly bring you wealth. I said, no, not wealth. I was actually reading Foucault at that time. I said, no, not wealth. You should say income. In the past, you used to say wealth, but these days wealth is negative. What we say is income. Income is acceptable, isn't it? It's because of economics. It will certainly bring you income rather than wealth. Clear? Now, in the case of language, Foucault says there were some general principles of grammar in the classical period, that means 18th century, but in the modern period, it has become linguistics. So Foucault points out that in this study, look at this, the structural patterns that link say the aspects of life in the modern period are not actually directly related to natural history at all. In order to understand biology, what we need is a synchronic study. We don't need a diachronic study. Synchronic similarities in the discipline become more important, more apparent than diachronic similarities within the discipline or over other disciplines. Did you understand? Foucault pointed out that the synchronic connections within biography or within economics or within linguistics are more important than how biology developed or how economics developed, etc. We don't talk about philology or the earlier forms of language anymore. We only talk about synchronically linguistics. Now, Foucault's understanding of history is often called history of the present or history of or effective history. History of the present. These are not very widely discussed terms because Foucault himself did not widely discuss it or define them. Anyway, this is a very famous term. History of the present is a very famous term. That does not mean how the present developed from the past in a unified manner. That is not what Foucault means by that. What Foucault means is the erratic and discontinuous process by which the present became the present. He is not even talking about the past there. The erratic and discontinuous process by which the present became the present. Often, epistemological ideas are important there. In the order of things, he talks about how discourses came into being. The present discourses came into being. We just saw that. How the present discourse of sexuality came into being. How the present discourse of psychiatry or criminality came into being. And they are all based on some epistemological connections. And the most important discussion of the history of the present, here's Foucault made in Discipline and Punish. That book marks Foucault's development from archaeology to genealogy. In Discipline and Punish, Foucault develops from archaeology to genealogy. If archaeology is about how a discourse is developed or created, genealogy is about how the human being is created within that discourse. Now, it is very difficult to explain archaeology and genealogy very clearly because it is rather confusing in Foucault himself. Genealogy works with almost the same things as archaeology. But this is how, let me explain. Archaeology defines how a discourse is created, while genealogy discusses how a human being is created entirely by virtue of his or her position within the discourse or within a network of power relations. A human being is always positioned within a network of power relations, and how the human being is constructed entirely because of this network of power relations. If you examine your own life, you will understand. You are not an independent, autonomous being. You are completely controlled by the country, the religion, the gender that you belong to, your family, economics, and other political relations, and so on and so forth. There are so many. That is what Rousseau also said. Man is born free, but always he is in chains because of this network of relations. Foucault shifted from a historical understanding of discourses called archaeology, therefore, towards understanding how the history of the present deploys the hidden conflicts and contexts of our identities, how the contemporary phenomena came to be what they are. Instead of looking from the past and coming to the present, he is just opening up the present and looking into the present to see what are the discontinuities that are at work there, which is more or less like the archaeological approach to history also. I have something to read here. So in Foucault's genealogy, history is understood as a means to critically engage with the present. Many of us in our school days and college days, when we were forced to study history, some of us enjoyed it, but many of us did not. When we were forced to study history, many of us would have thought, why do we have to study history? Why is it important? It is important to tell the children that we teach, or our own children, this thing. You should know history, not because it is something that happened in the past and it is dead and gone, because history is about the present. Even when we read Shakespeare or talk about 19th or 18th centuries, we are actually, in a way, talking about the present. When you talk about your grandparents, you're actually talking about yourself, because the elements of them are there in you. You are not separate from them. So history of the present does not denote talking about the past and how present developed from the past. Rather, it talks about it is about a critical engagement with the present. We can understand it if we look at the book Discipline and Punish. This phrase, history of the present, was originated in Discipline and Punish, and that work marked the end of Foucault's archaeological approach. What Foucault does in Discipline and Punish is to genealogically disturb the conceptions that we have of the past and present and help us bring about change in our perceptions. He helps us to see in a different way. He helps us to change our existing perceptions of the past and present and negotiate with them in a different way. Genealogy is a method of writing critical history. So today, genealogy is like critical history of the present, a way of using historical materials to revalue the present time, to redefine the values of the present time. Genealogical analysis traces how contemporary practices and institutions emerged out of specific struggles, how the present emerged out of specific struggles and conflicts, not going back to the past, but here itself in the present itself. And it studies the institutions and practices of the present time that we value and take for granted. But actually, these practices are more problematic and more dangerous than they otherwise appear. For example, very classic example for this, how, once more I will say what I'm exemplifying. Foucault says that in the present time, there are institutions, there are values that we take for granted. We think it is okay, they are good, but they are actually dangerous. When I talked about feminism, I talked about how Gayatri Spivak wrote post-colonialism or feminism. I talked about post-colonialism. I talked about how Gayatri Spivak wrote about 3 women's texts, Jane Eyre, White Sargassoti, and Frankenstein. And she showed how that these texts show feminism, especially the first 2 texts, White Sargassoti and Jane Eyre. They show feminist ideas. proto-feminist ideas, but there is worlding happening there. They disguise imperialism there. Like that, Foucault shows that in contemporary perceptions of sexual liberation, we are a sexually liberated society, we think. Women have found liberation. They have the right to do whatever they want. They can engage in free sexuality, and they have premarital and extramarital sexual relationships many times. We think it as an expression of sexual liberation. For example, a woman like Madame Bovary. From a 19th century perspective, she is an immoral woman because Madame Bovary had a very loving husband. He was very caring and loving, but he was different from her. He could not understand her. He could not please her or cater to her intellectual needs and social needs. There was a lot of gap between them. There was no match between them. In our contemporary society also, we will see couples like that. So in a 19th century perspective, it is wrong to leave your husband and go and seek other men and live a life the way you wanted. Flaubert, when he wrote Madame Bovary, is actually talking in a very late 20th century manner. He is talking in a very forward manner about sexuality. And Madame Bovary just lives a carefree life, spending money, and immorally she is living. And ultimately, she pays the price for it. She has to commit suicide. From a conventional perspective, it is very wrong. But a 21st century woman reader who is a feminist and a liberated woman will identify with women, Madame Bovary, and say it is okay because Charles Bovary could not give her what she wanted. So it is her right to live her life. In those days, there was no divorce. It is even today difficult for a woman to divorce. If a man says, I want to divorce the wife, it is easier. If a woman says, I want to divorce my husband, it is not easy. So the 21st century feminist reader will think, wonderful, Madame Bovary is justified. But Foucault is saying there is a problem even in that feminist reader. There is a problem even in the sexual liberation or sexual rebellion, because it still centralizes sexuality. So as long as sexuality is centralized and not normalized, as long as sexuality remains a very big issue, whether it is liberated or oppressive, then the thing happening is the same thing. There is no real liberation. So what I'm saying is, Foucault is showing that the institutions and ideas that we take for granted today are sometimes more problematic and dangerous than they seem. We have to question everything using the genealogical approach. So once again, let me repeat, the aim of genealogy is not to look at the origins, how all these things came into being. Of course, that is involved, but genealogy is not only about that. Foucault and Nietzsche were aware that there was no continuous development of any discourse towards what it is now. If you examine the development of a present discourse, you don't see a continuous development there. That Foucault and Nietzsche were both aware. And the idea of genealogy, therefore, is not to search for the origins, but to search for the processes of descent and emergence, how things came into being. The idea is to trace the erratic and discontinuous process by which the present came into being. That is called history of the present. I hope I made it clear. Now let me explain with discipline and punish. Yeah, before that, let me explain with the concept of India. A genealogical approach to India. I have deliberately chosen a picture of the flag that is not unified and perfect and complete. This is a picture of the Indian flag that is incomplete, that is in the process of becoming. How the present is in the process of becoming, how the erratic and discontinuous processes of the present time. Look at India today. Look at all the communal problems and the corruption and the mismanagement of affairs in politics and society. Look at all the people's struggles. Look at the inequalities existing in Indian society. Look at the attempts for rebellion from the part of women, from the part of gender minorities, from the part of underprivileged classes, from the part of certain communities. They are all trying to subvert mainstream ideas and practices. They are all trying to question established ideas and institutions. They are all trying to assert their power and identity. Look at the discourses of politics or economics. Look at what happened with changes happening in economics and education. The demonetization completely changed our economy. NEP might completely change our education. So there is a disruptive politics that is happening. The politics of the BJP government can be called a disruptive government, disruptive politics, where they completely take apart what is existing and create something new out of it. Whether that is going to be positive or negative, of course, it will be a mix of both, and it is yet for history for the future to bring us. So this India that is ruled by this party, where all these things have happened, and that has happened to Kashmiris, this has happened in Kerala, that has happened in Maharashtra, this has happened in Bihar or Assam, like that. Look at the present condition of India genealogically, and look at all the diverse formations, discursive formations within India, all the clashes and dialectical problems, and the emergence, the continuous emergence of the present. Probably even this webinar that we are doing, or take the example of your present as a person. You are present. You have done discourse, MA English. You have done all paper presentations, or you have started your research, or you're working in a college, or things like that. You have so many years of experience. Now in this webinar, also your present is emerging. In this moment of emerging presence, there are so many things that clash and intersect and interrogate and change and transform. Isn't it in this moment that you are emerging? Did you understand? For me as a businesswoman also, it is true. I have contact with so many people now. All of you who took this webinar course have given me the opportunity to meet more people, to present my work to more people, to make more useful things for you. Obviously, I will get money out of it. The people who are working with me will get money out of it. This money will lead to other better things. And I'm also learning from all this that I'm teaching. Every webinar is learning, because I'm learning more things and referring more. So my present is emerging. Are you able to understand? I'm explaining so much because this is very difficult to understand. Nobody easily understands. That is why. So my present is emerging, and my present that is emerging in this moment has a lot to do with you. You are being there. You are having paid the registration fees. Your interest in what I'm doing. Your appreciation in the chat box, or at the end of the day in the WhatsApp group. The orders that you place in Bodhi Tree that I see every day. It influences my performance. It changes me. It transforms me. It makes me what I am. So genealogy is not what I was in 1990, or how I was born, where I was born, etc. That is not what I am. Genealogy is the history of the present. I hope it is clear now. In Discipline and Punish, he is talking about the history of the present, looking at discipline, criminality, and idea of discipline in two ways. He is using the theory of panopticism or panopticon of Jeremy Bentham, and he's also looking at how modern prisons function. Modern prisons do not beat people like they did in the past. Of course they do, but there are torture machines and other ways of torture. Modern prisons do not cut off people's arms. Modern prisons do not hang people upside down. Modern prisons function in very clever ways, in very developed ways, using technology, using media, using all sorts of new techniques. Modern prisons will torture people in more effective ways. Modern prisons are not any less cruel. They are even more cruel, even more oppressive, and than in the medieval period. They are even more effective. They can annihilate people. I have given here very, you must have all heard of Guantanamo, where the Americans have done a lot of atrocities. So many people who enter Guantanamo are tortured very inhumanly and they disappear. They are denied trial. I have put some pictures here. This is like the panopticon. This man, the soldier, is like the panopticon. And these are the prison cells, and he is standing there in a very suggestive manner. And this is the uniform of the prisoners in Guantanamo, and they are chained and tortured, and they are they undergo a lot of horrible things. This kind of outdoor prison, where Ezra Pound also was put in an outdoor prison. This is very common in Guantanamo. It is impossible to get details of Guantanamo like this from the media because they are all classified information. Using media and technology, they are completely suppressing and controlling that information. And there is also a lot of protest. People, ordinary Americans, white people, dressing up in the uniform of Guantanamo and protesting against the horrible atrocities that happen, especially against the Muslims. It is against the Muslims who are, terrorists and called terrorists and falsely called terrorists also many times. They wait for justice. They are not even put under trial. They all die in US custody. That is what happens in Guantanamo. So discipline and punish is about how the discourse of criminality and also sexuality emerge, and genealogically Foucault studies it. Foucault says that a good example, Foucault doesn't say, I'm saying, a good example to understand this would be the social, legal, and medical norms that have emerged in the contemporary period as a means of regulating sexuality. There are social norms, legal norms, medical norms. Like, it is very bad on a woman's health to have more than 2 children. Actually, it is very bad on a woman's health even to have 1 child. You are never the same. You grow fat, all your bodily organs become susceptible to diseases after that. So mainstream society has given us social, legal, medical norms. Let us take a look at some examples. It is important to have sex. Without having sex, if you live, you might get some cancer, etc. So sex is necessary and important, but a single partner is important. Otherwise, you will get AIDS and other diseases. To wash your feminine parts with soap and other things have become a kind of non-existing thing these days because of the coming of feminine washes and things like that. These are all full of chemicals, and I'm sure they are not going to do anything good to us, but even doctors, everybody suggests all these things. Again, so many things like that related to women's sexuality are there as part of our general understanding in social, legal, and medical ways. These are all not given truths. We understand sexual liberation as a break with Victorian repressiveness. We think that it is good that we are doing a lot of things that we are doing, but Foucault views this very differently. Instead of seeing sexual liberation as a very positive, unified, empowering thing, Foucault regards the liberatory processes in our society as products of an apparatus of power knowledge. Many times, these, what we consider as liberation, is a result of oppressive power knowledge apparatuses or dispositives. Dispositive, I will come to that presently. These apparatuses or discourses, normalize the ideas of the socio-political and legal ideas, cultural ideas that are prevalent at this time. At this time, we all believe in certain things. Like I said, it is, you should not have a woman's sexuality related to women's sexuality. You should not have more than 2 children. You should have only one partner, but you should have sex with that partner, and you should maintain your feminine hygiene in certain ways and things like that. These can all be regarded as apparatuses of power knowledge that are in a process of formation and expansion every day, every moment. They normalize these ideas, and thus sexuality becomes a discourse. The idea of sexuality thus becomes a discourse. Our sexual preferences somehow become constitutive of ourselves, our identities. Sex is not considered just another process of the human being's body, but it is considered as constitutive of our identity. So when the LGBTIQ people regard sexuality as constitutive of their identity, it is wonderful, it is liberating, but at the same time, Foucault believes that it is also a product of the power knowledge apparatus. Now, coming to Foucault's diagnostic account of our contemporary experience of sexuality involves the specification of an apparatus of regulation. Foucault says, in our contemporary understanding of sexuality, we have to think about how our sexuality is regulated. And the second thing we have to think about is how we have to identify a historically specific problematization, how sex came to be regarded as a kind of problem for authorities at certain times. For example, when the LGBTQ people wanted to liberate themselves and voice themselves, the mainstream society looked upon it as a problem that should be solved. So sexuality as something to be regulated, as something that is a problem. Look at, the idea of dispositive, I said I will explain. Dispositive, or in English it is called apparatus, is a very important Foucauldian term. Dispositive means the physical mechanisms, that means the institutional mechanisms, the administrative mechanisms, the organizational mechanisms, as well as the knowledge structures that maintain and enhance power in our society. What are the apparatuses which maintain power in our society, which enhance power in our society? It is easy to understand: lunatic asylums or prisons or schools, or even literature, literary theory, education, computers, cell phones. All these things are apparatuses or dispositive that exert power upon us. And Foucault also talks about biopower, biopolitics. I mentioned that also yesterday. Please bear with me. I have to explain this also, because many of you will find it very useful if I explain these ideas. Biopolitics. It was in History of Sexuality that Foucault, for the first time, in the chapter called, in the volume called The Will to Knowledge, that is where he talked about biopolitics. What is biopolitics? Biopolitics refers to the complicated mechanisms of human life processes being managed by the regimes of authority. I told you this already another day, how gynecology or psychiatry manages our life processes. How, in what complicated ways our bodies and its processes are managed by the mainstream authorities, by the power wielders. That is called biopolitics. And Giorgio Agamben has also talked about biopolitics. A-G-A-M-B-E-N, very important figure. What is the power that is used to manage human beings? Biopower is often related to disciplinary power. Again, related and controlling them. It worked like the panopticon. So biopower or controlling of human beings works through disciplinary power, like the panopticon. And within disciplinary power, we have the docile body as well as the protesting body. The docile body is the body on which power works. The protesting body is the body that protests against it. Related to this is carceral archipelago, which I suppose I already told you. It is the what is called the archipelago, or the group of islands which become a prison. So with that, I come to the end of Foucault. That was a long session on Foucault. Let me quickly introduce you to an idea propounded by Clifford Geertz, Geertz, called thick description. He used the example of Balinese cockfighting. In Bali, cockfighting is a very famous sport, and Clifford Geertz talked about cockfighting as an example of thick description. What it means, thick description means, is that it is a description of human social action, like cockfighting, human social action, which should not be interpreted as just physical behavior or a sport, but their context should be interpreted by, in a larger, deeper social sense. A thick description typically adds a record of subjective explanations and meanings provided by the people engaged in the behavior. All these people are adding meanings to what is called thick description of cockfighting. Cockfighting is not just one entity. As any sport is not just one entity. When you do research on sports, you can use this idea. So the term was first used by another man, Gilbert Ryle, and Clifford Geertz used this idea to show his own practice of ethnography, a methodology that influenced New Historicism. So you are looking at one social event as in the entirety of all the people engaged in the act of social, in that social action. Because why Clifford Geertz introduced this term is because in generally anthropology, the anthropologist will come and look at something like cockfighting and reduce this social event to menial observations. He will just make some cursory observations. He will not even look at all the other people and their experiences involved in it. In Derrida's terms, all these other people found the écriture. This is only the logos, isn't it? So Clifford Geertz asserted that a culture can never be fully understood by looking at some isolated cultural events, but a culture should be looked at as a web of meanings. A web of meanings. For example, when we talk about this webinar as a thick description, when we do a thick description of this webinar, suppose you are writing a review or a thick description of this webinar, Kalyani Vallath spoke, these are the topics she spoke about, these are the things that she spoke about. And one last sentence is everybody enjoyed. This is not thick description. Thick description is telling all your stories. Did you understand? All your stories and how you related to what I talked about is more important than what I talked about. So that is about Clifford Geertz's thick description. Let me now come to cultural materialism. As you know, it is a term, I'm sure everybody knows this. It is a term introduced by Raymond Williams. It is a term used by Raymond Williams in Marxism and Literature. Very famous book by Raymond Williams. We'll talk about Raymond Williams in a while. Cultural materialism talked about history and culture in more or less the same ways like New Historicism, but cultural materialism is more political. Cultural materialism is more political than New Historicism. It gave a neo-Marxist orientation to New Historicism. Remember, New Historicism is Marxist, and it gave a neo-Marxist orientation to New Historicism. They go beyond Marxism and talk about the subaltern. They talk about the marginalized people more. Cultural materialism includes the work of the silenced margins or the underprivileged people, like the school children in the West, or the skinheads or counterculture movements in the West, etc. And also on popular culture. Cultural materialism also talks about television or popular music or fiction, popular fiction, things like that. Cultural materialism is really shocking. Its effect on us is really shocking when we talk about Shakespeare or some canonical writers like that. So cultural materialists looked at Shakespeare and looked at how the socio-political and historical context constructed the canon of Shakespeare. I will show you examples here. Cultural materialism talks about the politics behind the construction of the canons, as well as the subversive power of the canons, as well as the subversive power of popular culture. They subvert the canons. Now, the cultural materialists followed 4 major methods. They looked at the historical context of texts. That means the conditions in which the texts were produced as well as received. Very important. It is not enough to just talk about the condition of production of a text. It is also very important to talk about the condition of reception of a text. When you talk about The Tempest, it is not enough to talk about what are the conditions of its production or why Shakespeare came to write this text. It is also important to write about how this text is received by post-colonial readers, etc. Secondly, they talk about a theoretical method. They reach across disciplines and they imbibe values from socialism, feminism, post-colonialism, and so on. And they do a multifocal reading of texts, multifocal theoretical perspective they apply on texts. The third thing they focus on is political commitment. Political commitment means they are overtly political. They don't hide their politics. They talk about oppression and power and marginalization very openly. And they also do textual analysis. That means they do close reading of texts. They analyze the text. When Raymond Williams coined the term cultural materialism and defined it, he famously viewed culture as a productive process. Both these words are important. Raymond Williams viewed culture as a productive and process, both. Cultural materialists look at how hegemonic forces in society appropriate the canons, why certain writers become the canon, and why certain others do not become the canon, throws light on the ideology of the mainstream. Let me take the example of the Nobel Prize. Usually when people get Nobel Prize, you realize that those people who get Nobel Prize in literature are people who stand outside the Euro-American societies and criticize and expose their societies. Orhan Pamuk is a Turkish writer exposing the underside of Turkish politics. Mo Yan, the Chinese writer, exposed the underside of China. Like that, Thomas, what is it? That Swedish writer, he also, so what I'm saying is the Nobel laureates are people who support the ideology of America and Europe also, Euro-American mainstream ideology, and expose the corruption in the other of the Euro-American center. Europe and America form a center. They have the other. Africa is the other. Middle East is the other. India is the other. From Asia is the other. China is the other. From these other countries, whichever writers emerge and expose the corruption in these. If there is a Chinese writer writing against China, immediately he will be given the Nobel Prize. But Noam Chomsky, who exposes America, will never be given the Nobel Prize. Did you understand? So that is how the new historicists look at. So the new historicists are looking at how the power centers create the canon and why they create the canon. Shakespeare was always a pet topic for the cultural materialists and new historicists. There is Jonathan Dollimore and Alan Sinfield, who wrote their very famous book, Political Shakespeare, Essays in Cultural Materialism. In that book, Jonathan Dollimore and Alan Sinfield are looking at Shakespeare and how he, or as a writer, he or his works are related to context of production. This is not a real painting of Shakespeare. This is a glamorized simulation of Shakespeare. It is one of the 3 famous portraits of Shakespeare. So I deliberately put it to show how Shakespeare is glamorized by power centers to justify their own positions. And Jonathan Dollimore and Alan Sinfield show how Shakespeare is related to context of production. The economic and political system of Elizabethan and Jacobean England defined Shakespeare in certain ways. The economic and political system of Elizabethan and Jacobean England defined Shakespeare in certain ways. There is another famous book, This Thing of Darkness, I Acknowledge Mine, The Tempest and the Discourse of Colonialism. It is a reading by Paul Brown. You can find it in the internet. This Thing of Darkness, I Acknowledge Mine. And in this book, in this reading of Tempest, Paul Brown looks at the Tempest as riven with contradictions which bear the traces of social conflicts. You can also remember, he does not do a humanist reading of characters. What he does is to foreground the heterogeneous discourses of masterlessness or power, of savagery, of sexuality, etc. that are in Tempest. In this regard, we should also remember the post-colonial readings of Tempest made by Amy Césaire in Une Temte. Une Temte is a book by Amy Césaire. It's a play actually, rewriting Tempest. There is also Francis Barker and Peter Hume, who tried to demystify contemporary Shakespeare. Barker and Hume, H-U-L-M-E. They looked at how Shakespeare industry works, the midsummer tourism in Stratford-upon-Avon. I went to Stratford-upon-Avon in July once. There was a sea of people there. Nobody really interested in Shakespeare. They were all buying Shakespeare t-shirts and eating something there, and just so much, buying and selling Shakespeare industry happening. Shakespeare curios and things like that. Shakespeare became a commodity. There was nobody there who really thought about the spirit of Shakespeare's works or anything there, I suppose. So all this is related to historiography in general, or rewriting of history. Now, with the changes in the post-globalization era, literary theory, as you know, took the cultural turn. We begin to talk about cultural studies sometime in the 1990s in the academia, even though cultural studies as a discipline began in the 1960s itself. Cultural studies is an interdisciplinary approach to culture. It talks about how culture relates to larger social institutions and practices, as well as to mass media, everyday cultural practices. And it talks about how culture transforms our lives and identities and social realities. How cultures transform our identities, lives, social realities, power relations, etc. Cultural studies developed in Britain primarily, unlike other theories. Many theories developed in the US. And cultural studies came into being in the University of Birmingham in the CCCS. I will come to that. But before the CCCS, we have to talk about what led to this change. Liberal humanism kind of ended, and literary theory began, of course, in the 20th century. In the period of liberal humanism, there was a lot of discussion on high culture. In the Victorian period, there was a belief in high culture. Matthew Arnold and F.R. Lewis, T.S. Eliot, the modernists, they all talked about culture as belonging to the elite, culture as belonging to the the upper class people, the educated people, the metropolitan people, and they understood that popular culture or low culture existed in the margins. They did not give voice to the margins. Actively, the modernists actively propagated the spread of high culture, or what Arnold called the study of perfection, by propagating the idea of what is called taste. High culture is propagated in great literary works or canonical literary works. And these canonical literary works form what is called great tradition. And the modernists propagated an understanding of canonical literary works through what they called taste, the propagation of taste. And what do you mean by that? T.S. Eliot famously said the function of criticism is elucidation of works of art and the correction of taste. Now, the focus on popular culture or everyday realities of culture came after the post-war period, mainly in the Frankfurt School and New Left. The Frankfurt School was a little intolerant towards mass media and mass culture. We have already briefly talked about the Frankfurt School. They were intellectuals, academics, and political dissidents. They were rebels in politics. People like Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Erich Fromm, Herbert Marcuse, Walter Benjamin, and all of them critiqued capitalism, as you know, and they tried to change society and bring about actual social change. They came from Frankfurt, from the Institute of Social Research, and they had to run away to New York because they were oppressed in Germany and in Frankfurt. And the second generation of the Frankfurt School also emerged in Jürgen Habermas. The important theories of the Frankfurt School include critical theory and culture industry, negative dialectics, critique of modernity and capitalism, and so on and so forth. I have already mentioned another day that critical theory engages in a changing or bringing a paradigm shift to cultural practices. While traditional theory only describes culture, the aim of cultural theory is to change it. They wrote a very important book called The Dialectic of Enlightenment. In the video culture industry that you watched, we have wrongly said dialectics of enlightenment. That is wrong. The book is The Dialectic of Enlightenment by Adorno and Horkheimer. It came as early as 1944. Here, Adorno and Horkheimer are questioning what is the idea of enlightenment, and they are showing that enlightenment has failed. Enlightenment was a 18th century movement that showed man's emergence from immaturity and primitive kind of culture. The motto of the Enlightenment was progress and human perfection and science, which many Enlightenment philosophers like Voltaire have actually questioned also. Adorno and Horkheimer show that Enlightenment has failed. Later, the second generation Frankfurt School theorist Habermas showed that modernity has failed. Now, why the Enlightenment failed is because Adorno and Horkheimer says that in all discourses like Enlightenment, there is a potential for subversion. The theory subverts itself. Enlightenment collapses into primeval forms of repression. You are wondering what I'm saying. Even though we have so many kind of new approaches to culture, let me ask you some questions, then you'll understand what is the meaning of Enlightenment has failed. Enlightenment believed in progress. Marx, who was an Enlightenment philosopher, believed that human beings are constantly moving towards freedom and progress. Even then, why are we engaging in so much killing and barbarism? Why are we not free beings till now? Why are the Enlightenment ideas of science failing? Because many times science is creating problems, not only solving it. And why are human beings still oppressed and unequal? Why is there still the need to bring about human rights and scientific progress? because enlightenment has failed, because enlightenment is not a perfect thing that has completely attained its aims. So that is how they argue that enlightenment has failed. They also talk about the culture industry. It is discussed in the famous chapter called The Culture Industry, Enlightenment as Mass Deception, which is part of the dialectic of enlightenment. And here they say that art no longer is having what Walter Benjamin called aura. Art has fallen into mindless repetition. It has become just a commodity. It has become very superficial. Many times, when I was organizing this webinar, uh, in fact, some people actually attacked me in Facebook. Even for a webinar, you are charging 300 rupees. How materialistic you are. What a bad teacher you are, because you are selling knowledge, they are saying, because they expect my webinar to be part of culture industry. They think that like it happens in culture a lot. You collect rupees 300 and you give something superficial for rupees 300 without really caring for whether people benefited from it, or whether they will have use with it, or whether they will they have really understood what is being discussed in the webinar, etc. That is a very common thing these days. You pay money and you just get something or the other. You don't get properly. But because of cultural theory, because of literary theory, I'm a businesswoman with a difference, because I have understood that what is important in literary theory, according to literary theory, is the human being. If you are happy, if I give you, I don't even remember whatever money you have paid. I don't even know sometimes. I don't care also, because what matters to me is my customer or client. If you are happy, when I say I'll teach you Foucault for 300 rupees or even 3,000 rupees or 30,000 rupees, whatever it is, my performance, my product or service will only be based on the time I have and the resources I have. Within this time, whatever I can do, I will do, because that is how we should all be as teachers, as professionals, because the human being is what is important. And I know from my experience in business that if you're happy, you will definitely tell your friends, and as a business also, this will survive. So I don't have to cheat anybody. This is a new perception of business that you will get with cultural studies. Culture industry critiques that kind of business that commercializes culture and takes out the value of culture. It takes, just reduces culture and education and ideas and relationships, everything into commodities that are mindless. In the other webinar that I was conducting before this, a very famous professor asked me a question at the end of my discussion. Isn't test just part of this culture industry, and you are all always marketing your products and selling your things? Isn't this webinar just a platform to sell your things? Do you really mean anything else other than that? I don't think I am just selling my products. Even if none of you will buy anything that I tried to sell or any other product at all, you have still benefited from this course. You have got a lot of things from this course, I'm sure, because I have done it with my heart and soul, because I want to resist culture industry. I don't want to be that kind of a businesswoman. So if we internalize literary theory, cultural theory in this manner, we can really transform our lives in so many ways. It is so positive and democratic. New Left is a group of Marxists who critiqued orthodox Marxism and conservative Marxism in Britain, and they emerged with a new journal called New Left Review, which is a very major journal in this regard. And the people involved in all this New Left studies were E.P. Thompson, Perry Anderson, then Walter Benjamin, Terry Eagleton, Stuart Hall, and things, people like Raymond Williams, of course, Raymond Williams. The new left eventually gave rise to cultural studies. The new left eventually gave rise to cultural studies. So I just told you how in the Victorian period there was the belief in high culture, then how Frankfurt School came, and then new left came, and then people in the new left itself established at the University of Birmingham in the UK what is called the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. The Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. The Center for CCCS, it is called the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, was established by Richard Hogarth in 1964, and he is a very famous author of The Uses of Literacy. Hogarth became the first director of it, and after him Stuart Hall became the director. And after some years, because of some restructuring at the university, these people were not appreciated by their colleagues, so they had to shut down their CCCS. The Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies produced these monumental works, such as Richard Hogarth's Uses of Literacy. Let me read out a little bit about that and explain about uses of literacy. Richard Hogarth came from a working class background, and he tried to privilege the organic working class culture over mass culture. In metropolitan Britain, there was a mass culture produced by the mass media and late capitalism. Against this, Richard Hogarth posited the organic working class culture of the northern UK. And Uses of Literacy is subtitled Aspects of Working Class Life. It was an attempt to understand the changes in culture. Give me a minute to drink some water. Richard Hogarth tried to understand the changes in culture with the advent of capitalism. How capitalism brought about a drastic change in culture. That is what he is trying to show in this book. He attacks the impact of post-war consumer culture. Next important book is E.P. This is Richard Hogarth, by the way. The next important book is by E.P. Thompson, The Making of the English Working Class. That came in 1963. Uses of Literacy came in 1957. E.P. Thompson's book is a massive book on the development of the working class in the 18th and 19th centuries. Obviously, to get the evidence or material for his writing, E.P. Thompson had to struggle because in E.P. Thompson's research, he found that there aren't many, documents made by the, working class. There aren't texts or autobiographies or anything that he can depend on. So very sadly, E.P. Thompson based his research on court documents. When working class people, lower class people were arrested and put in court, their testimonies, court documents, folk art, songs, ballads, etc. were his evidences or documents. The next important figure is Raymond Williams, who wrote Culture and Society. Raymond Williams was also born in a working class family in Wales, and we have seen how he laid the foundations of cultural materialism. His first seminal book was Culture and Society, 1780 to 1950. All these works are rooted in history, as you can see, and it was inspired by T.S. Eliot's notes towards the definition of culture. It was against T.S. Eliot's notion of high spiritual culture, and Raymond Williams advocated culture as an ordinary way of life. Culture is ordinary and culture is a way of life. These are very important pronouncements made by Raymond Williams. You should actually do extensive reading on Raymond Williams. He's a very important founding figure. And in this book, he shows how we modify and describe, exchange, and preserve experience in various ways in our culture. That is important to the development of our culture. How, in other words, he explains how our cultures develop through the many ways in which we preserve culture, modify culture, describe culture, exchange culture, and so on. Did you understand? Exchange culture means the many ways in which we sell products and culture, tourism or markets or things like that. Media also, and how we preserve culture, our museums, our literary works, how we then describe culture. Literary theory itself is an example, and so on and so forth. The next important book by Raymond Williams, as you might know, is like a sequel to this book. It is The Long Revolution, published in 1961. In the long revolution, what is meant by the long revolution? He is saying that the coming generations will bring about a long revolution in our culture, like the industrial revolution and the democratic revolution. There will be a cultural revolution. That is what he means. And here he talks about what is called structures of feeling. In Long Revolution, Raymond Williams talks about structures of feeling. What do you mean by that? Structures of feeling are the lived experiences of people, their shared values, their shared attitudes, how all these try to gain dominance in every period. That is what is called structures of feeling. It is in Long Revolution that he famously talked again about culture. He talked about dominant culture. In every moment of history, in every period of history, there will be dominant culture, residual culture, and emergent culture. Whatever culture is dominant now is how Indians live now. Residual culture means things from the past that people did only in the past are still remaining in our culture. Because of political and social reasons, sometimes we see residual elements of culture re-emerging. Communal or religious or other cultural forms of existence are re-emerging. And also there are new counter-cultural processes also happening. That is called emergent culture. Those are new cultural practices that are originally at the beginning, they are against the dominant practices. But eventually, the emergent cultures may become mainstream cultures. Did you understand? Eventually, the emergent cultures may become mainstream cultures. I'm talking so fast because there are so many things to cover. I know that it might be tiring for you. It might be boring also. You might want to leave. But my main concern is to tell you everything I can within 2-3 hours, so that at least if you want, you can come back and watch the YouTube video and use it. Because we have only 3 hours and I don't want to just waste time. So that is why I'm so like a bullet train I am going. Okay. I don't get time to entertain you and make you feel happy about what you're listening, and all that I could do in some other classes, but today I don't have time for it. We are actually compressing the material for 1 month course into 1 week here. But as you know, many of you are professionals and you don't get time to listen to me for 1 month, right? Now, Raymond Williams has also written many other books that are very seminal in cultural studies, such as Communications is one important book that he wrote. Why did he write about communications? Because communications or various kinds of communications have a seminal role in culture. Culture comes into being. We construct culture, we negotiate culture through communication, right? Secondly, he has also written The Country and the City. He talks about how the countryside and the urban spaces or the city symbolize our socio-economic relations and changes. The countryside and the city he studies. You can probably relate it to space studies. And he has written a book called Keywords. Then he has written Marxism and Literature. I already mentioned Marxism and Literature because that is where he uses the term cultural materialism. Cultural materialism, as you know, is a is a politically charged means of reading the processes of culture as a productive process. Like in Political Shakespeare, Dollimore and Sinfield show how hegemonic forces appropriate canonical texts. Isn't it? I have already mentioned that and discussed it. Now, the next important figure in cultural studies is hiding there. It is Stuart Hall. He was a Marxist sociologist from Jamaica. And he came and lived in Britain. And his racial identity as a Jamaican also has a lot to do with his theories. Like Homi Bhabha's subjective identity informs his theories. He arrived in Oxford famously on a Rhodes Scholarship, and he founded the New Left Review, and he became director of CCC as also later. And Stuart Hall collaborated with other works. There is no single work that he has written. All his works are collaborative. Some of my professors and well-wishers tell me, you should not just teach all the time, you should write a book. Many academics focus on writing books. There will be books that remain in their name. And many people tell me, you should write books, you should publish theory, or you should study and do research and do postdoctoral research also. They talk to me as if I am losing out on something by not writing. But as a teacher, my greatest art and my greatest achievement is teaching. And in teaching, like Stuart Hall has done, I have done a lot of collaborative writing. I have been working with so many previous students and other people, research assistants, building material, training them. Many of them got books published in their names also. So it is not my individual theory or writing, but the collaborative process that I give importance to. Why do I do that? Because I learned from cultural studies, Stuart Hall, etc. Oh, they're also doing like that, so let me also do like that. I learned from them like that. Understood. So Stuart Hall has not written many individual books. And Stuart Hall has talked about the model of communication. For example, take the example of a fairness cream advertisement, like a Fair and Lovely ad or something. The first thing is how it is produced, the production of the message. Who produces it? In what way it is produced? For example, locally, if somebody sits in the company, the Fair and Lovely owner itself sits and produces, how will the ad be like? We had in Malayalam Atlas Ramachandran, who had Atlas Jewelry. He always came, and I think he made his own advertisements, and he always came in person and talked in his advertisements. And due to some politics, some huge thing happened to him, and his company got destroyed and all that. Anyway, how the ad is produced. If the owner is producing an ad, it will be like something. If you employ a PR company to conduct an advertisement campaign, it will be completely different. And what is the medium of these ads? How are they circulated? Ads that are circulated in newspapers, ads circulated on television, ads circulated in social media, they're all different in their identities, in their aims. They cater to different people, whether they are written or visual or oral. All these have tremendous potential. Everything caters to a different community and creates new different meanings. So that is also there as part of Stuart Hall's model of communication. Then use, how the communication, in what way is it put to use, and consumption. Use is important. And reproduction. Reproduction means the effect of the message leading to action. In my own business, I have also learned a lot from all this. I have learned a lot. I have imbibed all these ideas. One thing I never take for granted. Every time I do a webinar, I will create new material there, new PowerPoint, new insights I will bring into the webinar, because I know the production part is very important. I can't take it for granted, because there will be people attending the same webinars, etc. So production is seriously taken care of. Circulation. I go all over social media, and sometimes people tell me, don't post so many ads. You must also have felt it in your WhatsApp group. When we post too many ads, it is like disturbing. It is negative. You think, why are they selling so much? We already respect them and we know what their products are. Why do they have to push so much? It is like an experiment I'm doing, learning from culture and all that. Even though you feel negative at that point, pushing communication too much, like when I'm speaking also, I'm pushing too much, giving too much information, and my contention is that it will remain in your mind. The brand building will happen. The concrete presentation of cultural studies and Stuart Hall, even though every single thing I'm saying you don't get, because it is there in YouTube, because it is in the form of pictures, because it is there everywhere. All these things will remain in your mind, and sometimes you will read more, sometimes you will learn more. It will happen. That is why. So continuous circulation is necessary. If you just give it rest, it is going to fail. So as teachers, this is very important. If you teach one topic and leave it, and you don't ask questions, you don't remember it, students will all forget it. You have to continuously engage with what you have taught. You have to ask questions, you have to make them do something related to it. Even if there are time constraints, it's a very big challenge in online teaching. How will you continue to make the students engage with the circulation of ideas? Then use. I have to really focus on how you can use it. If I just teach you theory, it is not important. I have to put it in such a way that you can use it in research projects, you can use it in understanding culture in better ways, you can use it to prepare for exams like NET. I have to keep on highlighting the use. These days, a lot of my research assistants, who are my previous students, are working with me on a new project to create material on paper one, because we are going to start courses in paper one in a very new way. And when they create content and I edit it, and they make scripts about it, I keep telling them, I send it back for revision to them. And I say, you have to constantly talk about how it is applicable. Paper one ideas only, like mathematics and other things, but reasoning. But you have to constantly talk about how it is applicable in culture. You have to constantly talk about how you can answer questions in NET, because use is important. Without highlighting the use, if any product is sold to you, whether it is educational course or Fair and Lovely, you will not benefit from it. So the communication should be based on use and also reproduction. When I'm showing you slides, I know that you will take screenshots. At least the image will be there in your mind. You will be using this information in new ways. If there is no PowerPoint presentation, if I'm just lecturing, it will be difficult for you to reproduce. I want you to use all these ideas and give your own lectures, write your own articles, to put it to use and reproduce it. Even if you don't acknowledge me there, you may not say, I got all these ideas from Kalyani Vallath. You don't have to say. You need not say. But even then, if you reproduce what I'm saying because of me, that is good for me. That is good communication. Did you understand? In business, that is good business. In education, that is good. The students should reproduce what the teacher says, and they should use it and reproduce it. Did you understand clearly? So this is Stuart Hall's new model of communication. Stuart Hall also talked about encoding and decoding. I got this picture also from the internet. This is also part of communication theory and reception theory. So now communication is not only language. It is not only speaking and writing. It is about culture. Communication has merged completely with cultural studies. Encoding is the process of producing a message from frames of knowledge that you already have, from relations of production, from technical infrastructure, how you encode knowledge or encode meanings or encode messages. In this age of online teaching, it was in this year, in January, that I started online teaching. I have never done online teaching before that. In January, when I started online teaching, the first thing that I did was to buy a MacBook, an Apple MacBook. And then I bought things like this, speaker, microphone, and I bought some software. I also learned to use new things online. All this became my framework of knowledge, my relations of production. I started working with people who know technology and other things like this, technical infrastructure. So it was one conscious decision that I took at the beginning of this year, and nature conspired with me and brought COVID also, and online teaching became the norm. So when I make a message, like this webinar is a message. Did you understand? A product that I make is a message. A book that I create is a message. I am creating like phones or laptops, you won't be able to decode properly. And things like that. In this process of cultural encoding and decoding, Stuart Hall said there is another thing involved called cultural representation. It is from his book Representation that we got this idea. Cultural representation is how culture represents itself in multiple shifting meanings. Did you understand? So I am answering that professor again. When I teach, I am subjective. I cannot. Cultural theory teaches us that there is no objective truth that I can teach you, objective reality that I can teach you. I am talking from my cultural position as a businesswoman, as a woman, as a teacher, as a Malayali, and so on and so forth. And my culture is being represented. Your culture is being represented in this cultural act of the webinar. And there are multiple shifting, contradictory meanings at play here. I cannot just teach you cultural studies as a ready-made thing. When I teach cultural studies, it will be very different from how other people study cultural studies or teach cultural studies. Cultural representation is happening. When I teach you in this manner, I am moving against, I am breaking the stereotype of the academic. I am showing you that you are all academics because you're all people who can talk about culture. A person who teaches cultural studies is not only a person who speaks in the manner of a Central University professor or Columbia University professor or theorist in language that nobody understands and people become confused and all that. You don't have to be that kind of an academic. You can be a teacher in this manner also. So I am, by breaking the stereotype of the academic, I'm using cultural theory to empower you, to show that it is all easy. You cultural studies from activism either. Now, this is another aspect of cultural studies that Stuart Hall talks about, which is called circuit of culture. He did not personally talk about it. There was a group of theorists like Paul Duguay, etc., who were engaged in a study of the Sony communication. The first model of communication we talked about, it is related to it. First, we talked about communication. Here we are talking about production. First, there is production. Production means the making of cultural products, the making of clothes or the making of festivals. In Kerala, there is a festival called Atugal Pongala, where all women, not only from Kerala, from other parts also, they come and sit outside in the temple or also outside on the streets and make a dish for the goddess, and the belief is that the goddess is eating this and blessing us and things like that. This was a festival that actually started in the 1990s in this scale. Before that, in temples locally, people used to do that, but some media in Kerala actually gave a hype to this Atugal Pongala, and this became a very big cultural event in Kerala. But it is more than a cultural event. It is a platform to sell religion, to sell other products. It is a commodity. With all respect for Atugal Pongala, I have also friends who unfriended me for this reason also. They hated me for saying that Atugal Pongala has no religious, inherent religious meaning. It is more like a commodity. I'm helpless because Paul Duguay and Stuart Hall and many people said that. And how, like this Onam, for example, in Kerala, or even an Independence Day or such events in India, how these festivals, products, commodities, suddenly nobody used to wear Kerala saris very much. But of late, in the recent times, everybody is wearing Kerala saris a lot and flaunting Kerala culture. When I was a child, nobody wore Kerala saris or even sari. Some generation people did, but everybody wanted to wear Western clothes only, or salwar kameez, etc., because there were North Indian clothes in Kerala. But why some products are suddenly produced and who is producing them also all become important in circuit of culture. So after production, they talk about consumption, how these products are consumed. What is the meaning of consuming these products? When I buy a Kerala sari and wear it, what does it mean? who is paying for these festivals, or Vinayaka Chaturthi festival or Holi, etc., were not celebrated in Kerala before. But these days, these festivals are becoming very big state festivals even. Entire Kerala becomes, stopped because of Vinayaka Chaturthi processions, etc. And who is paying for it? And why are these festivals becoming important, and why are they being consumed? Did you understand? And this is also related to identity. Many people in Kerala in my childhood used to consider themselves Malayalis or Indians. Now, increasingly, people are considering themselves Hindus, Muslims, Christians. We are becoming more and more divided. And we are preserving our cultures and upholding our cultures. Why are we defining ourselves in this manner? What is the reason? What is the politics behind it? That is also under the purview of cultural studies and circuit of culture. And then the next one is regulation. Regulation is how we control these cultural processes, the formal and informal rules by which we control cultural products and processes. And finally, representation. What do these representations mean to us? And to whom does it mean? How many people are included in these representations? How many people are excluded in these representations? These are all important. And this is the mind-boggling ways in which culture works, represented by circuit of culture. Next, I will talk about Pierre Bourdieu. Pierre Bourdieu is a very important French sociologist today who taught in Algeria, and he talks about two kinds of capital, the social capital and the cultural capital. What is social capital? Social capital means the people you know, the contacts you have, that is social capital. The cultural capital means what you have or what you know. What you have or what you know. If you have a expensive BMW or Ferrari or Lamborghini, what does it mean? If you have a PhD degree, what does it mean? All that is cultural capital. So why you are attending this webinar is because you want to attain cultural capital. This is social capital. Did you understand? When you attend an actual conference, you actually meet people and build your social capital. You get knowledge and also build your cultural capital. Now, cultural capital is in three forms. There is embodied cultural capital. That means the qualities of the mind, your knowledge, your skills, etc. Your attitude, sometimes your beauty, all that becomes embodied capital. Objectified capital is material goods like this. Gadgets you buy, cars you buy, material things you buy like clothes. The suit is part of your objectified capital. Did you understand? Embodied capital is talents, skills, knowledge, beauty. Objectified capitals is material belongings. And then there is also institutionalized capital like degrees. So when you attend this webinar, you are getting knowledge, that is embodied capital. You are getting material things, probably like PDF or some physical material thing. You're also getting institutionalized capital like a certificate or a degree that you can put in your CV. I hope you understood. And within all this, there are cultural intermediaries, people who bring products to us, like the people who work in the advertising industry or the technical industry, etc. And with all this cultural capital that you get, you are getting knowledge, you are getting material things, you are also getting degrees. With all this cultural capital that you get, you have what is called habitus. All the cultural capital gives you habitus. Habitus means your habits or attitudes or your ways of thinking. Did you understand? It is the physical embodiment of cultural capital. When you have cultural capital, you have a physical embodiment of it called habitus. And with the habitus, we enter a field. A field is an area of activity or an arena of activity, like art or education or law or politics. These are all fields. And a field is not strictly based on social class. Even if you are lower class, You can be a very highly respected professor, for example. Even if you are lower class, you can be a highly respected professor. Even if you are a Dalit, you can still be a highly respected professor. So your position in society does not directly relate to your position in your field. Did you understand? And in the field, we all try to dominate and overcome. We are all struggling. That is why there is so much politics in colleges, etc., between professionals, between academics, etc., because in the field we are all trying to dominate and survive. Another important term in cultural studies is that of Black Atlantic. Paul, I'm just introducing some basic cultural studies terms first, and then I will give you an overview. Black Atlantic is a term introduced by Paul Gilroy in 1993. He was a Black theorist, and he says that when you talk about the Blacks, it is not just enough to talk about geographic continents like Africa, Europe, Latin America, North America, etc. There is beyond all this a nation of the Blacks, or a community of the Blacks. You know, you have to talk about the Blacks as a community that exists across the diasporas. They're in the African slave trade, from this yellow region in Africa, slaves were brought to North America, to South America, to Europe, and all the slave trade that happened created a certain experience that is common to all the Blacks in these countries, in these continents, the European continent, the North American continent, and the South American continent. So the unifying experience of the Blacks in these continents, the inheritance from the original African traditions, that gave them a unified identity also. So there is Black Atlantic, which is a conception of the Blacks in these three continents as a hybrid, culturally united and politically united space or race. So this idea of Black Atlantic is against the white cultural nationalistic ideas of race, of continents, of nations, etc. Black Atlantic talks about all the Blacks in these continents as being united. I hope you understood. Edward Soya has talked about another very important concept called third space. When you say third space, obviously you talk about first space and second space. What is first space? First space is, this is the city of New York, seen from an aerial, from an aircraft or a drone, for example, the whole view of New York. The place called New York, seen from a distance, see that aerial view, that is called the first space. The second space is the map of New York, or any place for that matter. The map of New York is the second space. The third space is how people live together in that space. The third space means how people live together in one city, how people live together and share their knowledge, share their experiences and emotions, share their dreams. There are conflicts. If only you go to New York and live there, will you be able to understand what it means by third space. So you can do research projects based on third space, how certain novels bring into being the concept of third space. You can, for example, do that research project. Next, another very important concept within cultural studies is popular culture studies. It was in the late 1970s or 80s that popular culture studies emerged, and it relates studies to comic books and television and internet and food and entertainment, sexuality, consumerism, sports, whatever you can think of in our daily life, in our popular life, that is part of popular culture studies. Popular culture studies is opposed to high culture. As you know, in the Victorian period and modernist period, there were conceptions of high culture. in Arnold and Eliot, etc. Popular culture was at that time regarded as inauthentic or banal or mundane or conformist or bad, consumerized, standardized, etc. Popular culture was looked down upon. Only high art, canonical literature, high culture was given importance. Popular culture was given no importance. And it was in Bowling Green State University in the US that the first courses in popular culture emerged. The courses in popular culture emerged for the first time in Bowling Green University. So many theorists have later on worked on popular culture. I'm just introducing these concepts, and then I will give you a map of cultural studies in order to understand. Related to popular culture studies, we have subculture studies also. Subcultures are a very common phenomenon in the West. In India, each state may be called a subculture. The Tamils, the Rajputs, or the Marathas, etc. can be called subcultures. But in the West, it is more pronounced. The subculture groups are cultural groups that exist within a larger culture. And many subculture studies have emerged. Dig Hibdige is a very, Hibdige, is a very important theorist in subculture studies. Related to subculture is counterculture studies. Theodore Roszak has written a very important book in counterculture. I'm talking about only the first major book. After that, there are so many later theorists and approaches. Countercultures do not actually exist in India very much. In the West, there are hippies, beatniks, hippies. Why they don't exist in India is as soon as some countercultural movement emerges, the society will repress them and beat them down, and politics, the police will catch them, etc. Related to sexual revolution, related to civil rights protest movements, related to feminism and free speech, Vietnam War, etc. In the West, many countercultural movements have emerged. Another concept related to culture and studies of culture is public sphere. Public sphere is the spaces where public opinions are formed. It is an in-between space connecting the people and the state. In YouTube, I put a video on public sphere. It was Habermas who first talked about the public sphere, the magazines and newspapers that we read, the clubs and coffee houses of the 18th century, the shopping malls that we go to today, the cyberspace where we engage in social media. These are all examples of public sphere. Public sphere is very important. It can potentially fight against the public sphere can potentially fight against mainstream authoritarian practices and give us more empowerment. Another concept that is important in in cultural studies is that of post-humanism. It was already there in H.G. Wells and very early writers, but then Manfred E. Kleins coined the term cyborg or cybernetic organism, as everybody knows, which later became the part of the title of Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. It was Catherine Hales who talked about how we became post-human in a seminal book. What is post-human is an engagement with what is beyond human, what is other than human. So what is other than human means animal or superhuman or non-human or machine, etc. So in post-humanism, there is a look at what are the various ways in which we engage with the animal or the machine or the post-human. And it deals with, post-human studies deals with communication and information technology and digital culture, and what are the ways in which the idea of the human become renegotiated in these contexts. Donna Haraway in Cyborg Manifesto talked about the ethical position of the human towards the other, towards what is not human. How, we look down upon the machine or the other in many ways. But she talks about the importance of rejecting established ideas of identity, rejecting rigid boundaries of gender and identity, and embracing a socialist or postmodern and anti-essentialist conceptions of identity in order to understand the post-human. The theory of the post-human has led to many approaches within cultural studies, such as the idea of information society, or data feminism, or network society, and things like that. How the use of technology and the use of media have transformed us in different ways. There is a related term called transhumanism. It is different from posthumanism slightly, because transhumanism is about how human beings try to better their life, how there is an enhanced human life possible because of technology. When we use in literary theory, it should be post-human. Transhuman is about how Elon Musk is trying to take us to Mars, or how the scientist Peter, somebody is trying to turn into a cyborg, how using technology we will have enhanced experiences in 5G, and things like that. These are all part of transhumanism. Now, cultural studies also embraces on some other ideas like trauma. Yeah, I will stop at 1 o'clock. Trauma, I couldn't separate cultural materialism and new historicism with cultural studies. Did you see? I don't know why I use the other division in the original plan for the webinar. Trauma studies is very important because human beings in the present times undergo trauma in so many different ways. The disruptive experience of trauma, both psychological trauma as well as collective trauma, cultural trauma because of genocide and abuse and so on and so forth. The idea of trauma originated in psychoanalysis. When I mentioned or talked about Sigmund Freud, I already told you that Freud and his contemporaries studied hysteria. And the study of hysteria or mental illness was integrally connected to trauma. Why many people turned hysteric because of trauma. And the main concerns of trauma studies has to do with individual trauma related to identity, or PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, related to memory, how memories of abuse and say other kinds of traumatic post-colonial experiences, or discrimination in the case of Dalits or African Americans or women, etc. How, for example, you can apply the concept of trauma in The Bluest Eye, for example. How Collie turns into a rapist because of his own personal remembrances of trauma. He, in his adolescence, was like everybody else, trying to have some physical contact with a girlfriend. And because he's a black man, some white boys found him and made so much fun of him and treated them like animals. Collie's many experiences of trauma in his life, how his father deserted them, and he was born out of an illegitimate relationship, and how he went to search out his father, and his father doesn't even recognize him and treats him like a like very bad treatment he gets. So these traumas characterize Collie, and he eventually turns into a rapist. And how Pauline, the mother, also undergoes trauma, how Pecola undergoes trauma, how all black people undergo trauma, even if they are powerful, or like Geraldine undergoes trauma. Geraldine's child, Junior, undergoes trauma. So many ways in which trauma works in African American life. You can study this in the same things in Beloved also. You can study trauma in Moyan's works. So literature, how it expresses collective trauma, and how it is related to the discourses of identity and memory, and also language and representation, how intergenerational trauma from generation to generation trauma attains different meanings, and so on and so forth. How when grandmothers tell their stories, grandchildren will not understand, because the ways in which they feel trauma or negotiate with trauma are completely different. So there is both psychological trauma that we are talking about, as well as cultural and collective trauma. Trauma can also be studied in relation with genocides like Holocaust, or Palestine, and sometimes Kashmir, and things like that. The politics of trauma, the politics of terror, from both angles, from the angle of the victims of terror as well as the terrorists. Many people have already written about all this, and that is very important in cultural studies. Next is globalization. Globalization, as we know, is many ways a wonderful thing, because of globalization, we are able to travel to other countries, we are able to study theory from other countries, we are able to enjoy very good products that come from other countries, we are able to watch media from other countries. It is wonderful. But at the same time, globalization, or the creation of a borderless world, has also changed our cultures in very undesirable ways also. It has not really resulted in plurality, but it is also homogenizing us, because globalized economies and globalized cultures are largely Americanized, and because of all this, there are also a lot of negative impact on our economy also. So Arjun Appadure, one of the globalization theorists, talks famously about how the global flow of cultures result in a lot of cultural transformations. When he talks about ethnoscape, he talks about the global flow of people. When he talks about technoscape, he talks about the global flow of technologies. Financescape is the global flow of money, and mediascape is the global flow of media. Ideoscape is the global flow of technologies. All these scapes, Arjun Appadure shows, are in a disjuncture, or a disconnected, or it is not in a unified reality that they exist. For example, the ethnoscape of Kashmir or Kashmiris is in disjuncture with the ideoscape of India. Did you understand? The people of Kashmir, the movement of people in Kashmir, that is being controlled by India, because the ideology of India, or the ideoscape of India, is clashing with the ideoscape and ethnoscape of Kashmir. And similarly, Benedict Anderson shows how technoscapes, or the movement of technology, can change ethnoscapes and ideoscapes, etc. So what Appadure is ultimately showing is how our nations and cultures are actually imagined communities, like Benedict Anderson said, and how cultures keep transforming in different ways. Another very important part of cultural studies is gender studies and queer studies. We have already talked about it to a large extent, but I should not fail to mention it, how gender studies have rejected ideas of heteronormativity, and I highlighted issues like identity politics, or lived experience, or performativity. They have started looking at sexuality as a dynamic entity, and also as political. And it is riven with contradictions, like Foucault pointed out. Nevertheless, they are all very important. We talk about performativity and intersectionality, etc., in this context also. And there is also visual culture studies in this context. Now I have to show you, there are so many mind-boggling varieties of cultural studies, which I cannot suddenly teach you or tell you all about within 2 hours. So I will just give you an overview of it. Cultural theories can be divided into groups, I'm saying. Group 1 is about spaces. Space studies is there, city studies is there, urban studies is there, modernity studies. Anthony Giddens is a very important figure in modernity studies. Then what is her name? Uh, Not Donna Haraway, something like that. Oof. There is a woman who writes about urban spaces. I can't remember her name. City study of the city space. Edward Soya, already I mentioned. Andre Lefebvre, globalization studies I mentioned. Development studies and literature, international relations, culture, all are related. Subaltern studies, empire studies. Empire is a famous book, as you might know. Michael Hart and Antonio Negri wrote it. Then ecological studies all deal with space. Within the purview of this, we have, why is it not coming? 1 minute. Yeah. Space studies. Within the purview of this, we have, I will just introduce to you more. I think I failed to download the, why is it not coming? This is there. So group 2 cultural studies form youth culture. No, I didn't tell you the names of the important people there. Yeah, wait. In space studies, we have people like Pierre Bourdieu. I already mentioned Pierre Bourdieu. Then Edward Soya, Arjuna Padure. Then please note these names also. If you Doreen Massey, that is the name that I forgot. Doreen Massey. Paul Virilio. Paul Virilio has talked about speed and urbanity. He connects the speed of metropolitan cities to military culture. And even 5G is a military culture. Even 5G that is going to bring unprecedented experiences of speed is a military culture. Paul Virilio has talked about dromology and things like that. Then Ranajit Guha, Deepesh Chakrabarti, Partha Chatterjee all deal with subaltern studies. Slavoj Žižek can be considered as part of this. Andrew Ross, David Easton, etc. are important figures. Next, I'll talk to you about the second group of cultural theories that are cultural theories related to people, like youth culture. And Angela McRobbie is a youth culture theorist as well as a feminist. Popular culture was studied by many theorists, and subculture, counterculture also. Race studies, ethnicity studies, food studies, art studies all come under people studies. And the other important figures include Andy Bennett, Angela Davis, Paul Willis, Paul Gilroy, Black Atlantic, then Theodore Roszak, Dick Hebdish, etc. Something has happened. Again, I have to go like this, otherwise it's not moving. Then the cultural theories related to gender are, we are coming to a conclusion, feminism and post-feminism, cyber-feminism, all that we studied. Important figures are Kate Millett, Adrienne Rich, Judith Butler, Susan Sontag, Bell Hooks. We have mentioned all of them. In transgender studies, there is Jack Halberstam or Judith Halberstam. Then there is Janice Raymond. In queer studies, there is Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick. In disability studies, there is Robert McCruer. A part of disability studies is CRIP theory. Then David Halperin. In trauma studies, we have Kathy Caruth, Kali Tal, etc. Susan Sontag talked about CAMP. And then lastly, we have the visual media, visual culture studies. That is group 4. Visual culture studies. There we have television studies, film studies, media studies, new media studies, visual culture studies, museum studies, cybernetics, post-humanism, digital humanities, etc. Digital humanities is the new approach where humanities are studied, the impact of technology on humanities is studied. At the same time, the impact of technology is studied from a humanistic perspective. Both approaches are there in digital humanities. Digital humanities is a very wide-ranging discipline. It is not only a theory, it is also something you can study for BA and MA, and you can work in digital humanities also. Important figures are Marshall McLuhan, then Stuart Hall, John Fiske in television studies, Tony Bennett, very important, Donna Haraway, just 2 minutes more, Catherine Hales, Henry Jenkins, John Berger, Nicholas Mirzoff, Robert Stam, Richard Dyer in film studies, etc. We are also, having other studies that do not come under these, like celebrity culture studies or Renaissance studies or animal studies and nation studies and so on and so forth. So that is the mind-boggling variety of cultural studies that we have today. I have only introduced many of these ideas, just mentioned some names. We come to the end of this presentation. I don't think we have a lot of time to discuss questions today. Sayed Lakshmi or whoever is the moderator, please send me the questions from the chat box. It is tomorrow that I will address the questions. I will look at the questions and address them tomorrow, because I have overstretched time for obvious reasons. It is not possible to talk about all these things otherwise in 2 hours. So please post your questions to Setu Lakshmi's email ID that she had given already. She's giving it again now in the chat box. I will address your questions tomorrow. So thank you very much. Tomorrow I will talk about 2 remaining theories, reader response and echo criticism. Tomorrow I will not teach so much. Tomorrow we will have some interaction. Please come and talk to us about what you think about the webinar and things like that also. At least some of you should speak a little bit, because only then cultural theory will become really practical, only when you respond and talk about various things. I don't mean just thank me and praise me or anything. You don't have to praise. Let us also hear more suggestions from you, more comments on what is happening in the academia, more comments on what you guys are doing in your projects, etc. So I'm without any more this thing, I am stopping my lecture. Okay, is there anything to do now, or do we just end the meeting? Shashikant? You have to unmute yourself, Shashikant. We can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself. Shashikant, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Is it audible?
Yeah.
So after this wonderful session, I would request to all participants, those people who comment on this webinar, they should initially give their name to the Setu Priya, I think. Am I right?
Setu Lakshmi.
Oh, Setu Lakshmi. So already she has given her mail ID. So you just give your name initially, then it is possible for us to complete the what you call seminar. That is the last part, that is valedictory we can. Because suppose we moderate like this, everyone will get the chance to speak. Otherwise, it will become a little bit confusion and chaos. Yes. Suppose all the people speak collectively. Yeah, so the thing is like this.
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Then I'm ending the meeting. Please have lunch and rest, everyone. Meet you tomorrow at 10.
Okay, ma'am.
Bye.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.